Number 10. Jason Todd's worst fear. Probably one of the most heartbreaking moments for me in recent years in terms of DC Comics happened during Three Jokers, Batman Three Jokers, so pretty recently. I'm still not really sure why people don't like this comic. I thought the story by Jeff Johns and artist Jason Fabok was well worth the multi-year wait myself. It was suspenseful, it was mysterious, and it was just stunning. And honestly, every time I go back to it, I find something new that I like about it. Sure, the middle act in issue number 2 lagged a bit, but otherwise this comic to me was pretty flawless, other than a few minor plot hole issues in my opinion. Also the raccoon. Ah! And despite the lag in issue number 2, it still had one of the most heartbreaking moments for me, which occurred when Jason as Red Hood chose to strike out on his own and ended up finding a pool filled with failed attempts at creating the next Joker, which in and of itself is another kind of brutal. At one point the Three Jokers implied that Jason actually might be the best candidate to become the next Joker, but decide that he's simply not smart enough to take up the mantle. Ouch. Instead, they once more beat him to within an inch of his life with a crowbar, with one of the Jokers, implied to be the Joker who first did this to Jason way back when, commenting on how the second time was even more fun than the first. It gets especially brutal and heart-wrenching when Batgirl and Batman arrive on the scene to rescue him and he lashes out at them. Especially when like Babs just comes in and gives him a hug and she's like, I just want to make sure you're safe.
Number 9. The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Batman The Dark Knight Returns came to us originally as a way to give Batman, Bruce Wayne, a fitting end, and it's easily one of the greatest Batman stories out there, with Frank Miller art that was actually understandable and a great tale that wrapped up the character of Batman in a lovely little bow. But then, Frank Miller went and created 2 sequels, and the first of which is basically a fever dream of insanity, overly objectified blocky cartoon women, and just odd visuals, while also taking the character of Superman and completely misunderstanding and disrespecting him. But I think the most egregious moment came when Supes and the third member of the Trinity, Wonder Woman, decided they were going to hook up, right after Batman beat the absolute snot out of the Man of Steel. Wonder Woman comes in to find Superman completely beaten and bloody and ranting about how it's all over, and then, after punching him for being weak, I guess, they immediately start making out. Then they fly up into the stratosphere and begin going at it midair, and then slamming into the ground, causing volcanic eruptions, massive earthquakes, and tsunamis, hurricane-level winds, all for Wonder Woman to say he moved the earth for her. Wow, so poetic. And then she exclaims she is pregnant now, and they decide to get a bite to eat, but they sure are heroic.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? Helps us out, helps you to stay in the know, it's a win-win.
Click the subscribe button!
Do it!
God!
Number 8. Jason Todd loves Barbara Gordon. Another really brutal moment, possibly one of my least favorite parts, I think, of Three Jokers, comes at the end. After taking Jason in and helping him to recover after he was attacked, Jason at one point attempts to kiss Barbara. It kind of makes a little bit of sense because, you know, they've got shared trauma, but this felt weirdly forced still and out of place to me because, you know, Babs still seems like she's kind of trying to be there for Jason like a sister. Like, I get that Jason is reaching out because for years he's felt like he was left behind, abandoned, and you know, like I said, they do have shared trauma, but Babs and Jason's relationship has always felt more platonic to me. And if anything, more than that, more familial. Like they were truly, you know, brother and sister. And when Babs reaches out, it's very clear she's coming from this place, and yet Jason seems to struggle to read the room and acts on his romantic feelings anyways, if that's even what's really going on for him. Honestly, I think he's just confused. The third issue ends with a kind of weird note with Jason leaves on our apartment door, and that ends up falling off and then being swept away by the building's janitor, which is especially weird and kind of cringe because it seems to imply, like that whole sequence of shots, that if Babs found it, things may have been different between them. Other than Barbara having to once more reaffirm her boundaries with Jason, I don't see how it could have ended otherwise. What a strange romance subplot that I never expected nor ever really wanted. But hey, there it is.
In its 7, Chewing Gum. The Justice Buster Batsuit is a mech suit that's part of Batman's Fenrir contingency, which is designed to take down the entirety of the Justice League if they were to turn bad. Making its feature appearance in Batman Endgame, when the Joker used his virus to warp the brains of the Justice League at the beginning of this Endgame plot, Batman was forced to use the Fenrir protocol to eliminate the teammates, or well, to at least subdue them. The suit was successful in eliminating Wonder Woman, the Flash, and Aquaman, but met an even match at the hands of Superman. After a lengthy fight, Superman tore through the armor and nearly killed Batman until Bruce used kryptonite chewing gum to spit in Clark's face, rendering him unconscious. Come on, okay? Imagine waking up to learn that you passed out because Batman spit on your face. Seriously, please, brush your tongue, okay? You get one of those tongue scrapers. Your breath is lethal. Not to mention the miniaturized red suns for Knuckles, they didn't help. You had to spit kryptonite chewing gum.
Number 6. Ethyl chloride. Ethyl chloride, a common compound found in pesticides and bug sprays, is essentially Spider-Man's kryptonite, and it severely impairs his senses. This makes ethyl chloride extremely powerful against Spider-Man. It's one of his biggest weaknesses, but yet ethyl chloride isn't being used by all of his villains all the time, even though it's actually a very common compound. The big reason why it doesn't show up much is that ethyl chloride is considered to be so supremely powerful against Spider-Man that there was a momentary ban placed on the substance by Marvel writers. It was literally becoming too easy to bring down Spidey, so writers got lazy and used it as a crutch just way too many times. Amazing Spider-Man number 106 has Spider-Man engaging in battle with the Spider Slayer Mark IV, which had the villainous addition of ethyl chloride. After trapping Spider-Man in a web, Smythe, the guy who created it, uses his machine to douse Peter with a cloud of the compound, and Spider-Man is weakened by the spray and finds himself unable to move, giving his enemies the chance to strike.
Halfway through into number 5, breathing. If I said Batman vs. Hulk, I think we should all agree, unless you're in denial, on the outcome, right? Talk about a one-sided fight. Batman standing up to Superman is one thing, they share a universe, you can get kryptonite, whatever. But Batman and the Hulk? No. Unfortunately though, they have gone toe-to-toe, and surprisingly, Batman achieved the impossible feat of defeating Hulk. In the harmonious days of 1981, when DC and Marvel were on friendly terms and the concept of separate universes hadn't really come to fruition, they occasionally collaborated on crossover stories. One such amusing tale unfolded in DC Special Series number 27, written by the late Len Wein and illustrated by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. In the extraordinary encounter, Batman unexpectedly crossed paths with a rampaging Hulk, manipulated by the Joker to view Batman as a villain. The Hulk turned his fury towards the Caped Crusader, and Batman, recognizing the immense power of his opponent, somehow skillfully evaded Hulk's fists with every move, because you know, one hit would kill him. With calculated precision, Batman then deployed a pellet of knockout gas, which was disorienting the Hulk, but you know, not knocking him out because it's the Hulk. Exploiting a moment of weakness, Batman incapacitated the Jade Giant by kicking him in the gut, forcing Hulk to inhale. That's right, yeah, Batman kicked Hulk in the gut and actually made him flinch.
Number 4, Asbestos. Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, was one of my favorite superheroes as a kid. He can create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome. His Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, except of course for asbestos. Now, thankfully, in our modern world, we know that asbestos is pretty incredibly toxic, and it's totally banned across most of the world. But you see, back when the Human Torch was first created in 1963, it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. And the Human Torch was wide open to asbestos-based attacks. Specifically though, the Torch has found himself going up against villains based on the stuff, Asbestos Lady and Asbestos Man. Both of these villains made use of asbestos-based outfits or armor and tools of the trade. But like I said, we know this stuff to be incredibly toxic, but we didn't know that then. So as time went on, Asbestos Lady, aka Victoria Murdoch, passed on from idiopathic mesothelioma at age 45, presumably from asbestos exposure, and Asbestos Man was forced to start wearing an oxygen mask and presumably also passed on due to his asbestos exposure. I guess they also had a weakness to the stuff, huh? R.I.P. R.I.P. in the chat.
Getting close to the end of number 3, bullets! Now, with the Flash being the fastest man alive, you'd expect him to, you know, be able to react to things. And while this weakness isn't exactly showcased with the Scarlet Speedster in a meaningful way, it is certainly demonstrated well by his counterpart, the Reverse Flash. Imagine our surprise when Reverse Flash ends up getting popped in the head by none other than Thomas Wayne in the Flashpoint timeline so that Barry could access enough Speed Force to save the world and bring his son back. Batman shot Reverse Flash in the head. And while this apparently killed Thawne, that was far from the end of the story, because Thawne started vibrating as fast as he could to slow the destruction of his brain. This gave him more time to avoid death and gave him the ability to hold a grudge. But seriously, shooting a speedster in the head has to be one of the dumbest ways a speedster has been defeated. And that's including the entirety of the Flash TV series, even the final season where he shakes hands with the negative Speed Force.
Number 2, yellow. Never eat the yellow snow. It's a rule that a lot of us know. While that may be a statement made to stop small small children from consuming human or animal pee, I think it would be a perfect saying to introduce into the Green Lantern Corps. Hal Jordan has protected the Earth from interplanetary threats with his incredibly powerful ring and his incredibly powerful will. And yet, you face him armed with a handful of buttercups and he is rendered practically useless. According to the comics, an impurity in the ring's power source meant that Jordan became powerless when faced with the color yellow. This was later expanded by Jeff Johns' Green Lantern Rebirth as being tied to Parallax, a yellow fear entity who was locked in the central power battery, thus weakening it. Now, when you say it like that, it begins to make, I guess, a little bit more sense, but before this was revealed though, Green Lantern's weakness was just dumb. And it still kind of is. This is no more evident than in All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller, specifically issue number 9 when the Caped Crusader trapped Hal Jordan in a yellow painted room and let a yellow suited Robin go to town on him. And this is all because it's the dumbest weakness we have ever heard of. Bruce Wayne said it himself, so it has to be true.
And it was all yellow. And finally, in at number 1, Wood. Wow, look at that. Green Lantern number 1 and number 2. Throughout the years, Green Lantern has encountered various weaknesses tied to his powers, okay, like yellow. But one particular vulnerability has been overlooked by most comic writers, mostly because it's specific to the Alan Scott version. Green Lanterns, they use their powers, they use them to fly, communicate in different languages, create energy constructs, or will constructs, I guess, because, you know, green. But you know, you have to balance it out somehow. So in Alan Scott's case, wood was the chosen weakness. It has an explanation, and it stems from the subconscious belief that his abilities couldn't affect the material, and that's literally it. He didn't have the belief that he could do anything to wood, so he couldn't, which just showcases that belief is the most powerful superpower of all, unless you're facing against a number 2 pencil, which I guess would actually take out both of them.
Number 10. 3 Jokers. Thanks to Batman's time on the Mobius chair during DC's Darkseid War event, Bruce discovered that there are apparently 3 Jokers running around Gotham City. This led to the 3 Jokers story from 2020. 3 crimes were committed on the same night, seemingly all by the Joker. Alongside the Bat family, Batman discovers that these crimes were committed by the 3 different Jokers that he learned about. The original Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, the Killing Joke Joker, known as the Clown, and the Silver Age Joker, known as the Comedian. Jason Todd, Barbara Gordon, and Batman himself all team up to go after each Joker one at a time, and as you might expect, it doesn't nearly go that smoothly. This is one of the best Joker stories in recent years. It almost feels like it stands alone outside of any kind of continuity, and that's because it kind of really does. It's incredibly good and surprising and keeps you on your toes, and the revelation of 3 different Jokers was something a lot of people just never expected. But what I think is even better than the 3 Jokers is the chaotic feeling of not knowing if there were actually 3 or if there is a definitive Joker until the end of the story. Number 9. Infamous Iron Man. Of all the things to happen to the character of Dr. Doom, becoming the new Iron Man was not at all what I expected. After the events of Secret Wars and reality being brought back to normal, Victor Von Doom was kinda just unsatisfied with his life. He decided to switch his morality and try to serve and help others instead of being a power-seeking villain. Doom took on a bit of a mentor in Tony Stark, whom he'd always actually respected, but when Tony Stark was put into a coma, Doom decided to take his place as the infamous Iron Man, which was a great reason to give us a Dr. Doom in a highly advanced suit of Iron Man's Model Prime Mark 51 armor. The armor was retrofitted into Doom's style, going from the red and gold to the gray, green, and light blue of Dr. Doom, and it's probably my favorite look ever for an Iron Man armor, period. But alongside the capabilities of the Iron Man armor, Doom was still able to access his magical abilities. To make things even better, Doom's intellect and sorcery were near their peaks during this period in time, so he is truly an incredibly powerful hero. One of the ways Doom went about saving the world was using his knowledge of the criminal underworld from when he was a criminal to arrest a large gathering of villains in one big move. These villains were all gathered to figure out what they were going to do now that Dr. Doom has switched sides, and then Doom just busts through the roof and takes down heavy hitters like the Wizard, the Wrecking Crew, and the Hood and Jigsaw all in one go. It's awesome. Number 8. Dark Knight. Batman The Dark Knight Returns came to us originally as a way to give Batman/Bruce Wayne a fitting end, and it's easily one of the greatest Batman stories out there, with Frank Miller art that was actually understandable and a great tale that wrapped up the character of Batman in a lovely bow. But then Frank Miller went and created 2 sequels, and the first of which is basically a fever dream of insanity, overly objectified blocky cartoon women, and just really odd visuals, while also taking the character of Superman and completely misunderstanding and disrespecting him. But I think the most egregious moment came when Superman and the third member of the Trinity, Wonder Woman, decided that they were going to hook up, right after Batman beat the absolute snot out of the Man of Steel. Wonder Woman comes in to find Superman completely beaten and ranting about how it's all over, and then, after punching him for being weak, I guess, they immediately just start making out, and then they fly up into the stratosphere and begin going at it mid-air. Then they slam into the ground, causing volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricane-level winds, all for Wonder Woman to say that Superman had moved the earth for her. Wow, so cute, so poetic. And then she exclaims that she is now pregnant, and they decide to go and get a bite to eat. It's really weird. It's really weird.
Moving on to number 7, we have Captain America. Captain America has been mocked in the past for being perceived as a weak superhero, particularly a weak member of the Avengers. Now, Steve Rogers gets his superpowers thanks to the Super Soldier Serum, which turned him from a scrawny fine arts student in the comics into a superhero with peak physical strength, speed, durability, agility, reflexes, senses, and mental processing. Now, throughout the years, he has lost the serum at times. Plot device much? Once even turning him into an elderly version of Rogers. On top of that, he's often pegged as one of the weaker members of the Avengers, like I mentioned. It ain't easy being compared to the likes of the Hulk or Thor or Iron Man. But when it comes to Cap, it is not just his Super Soldier Serum granted abilities that make him strong. It's his willpower and his mind. He is a master tactician, strategist, and field commander, and sometimes people forget how invaluable those assets are for the Avengers team. In addition to that, Captain America is more than just a person. He is a symbol. Rogers is one of the only superheroes to appropriately represent that symbol. He is a man of honor, and his desire to serve the American people for the greater good is one of his most underlying motivations. And that speaks volumes. And at number 6, Nightcrawler. When we think of Nightcrawler, we think of a blue, devilish-looking X-Men member who has an accent and teleports. Teleporting is his power, so it's easy to assume that he isn't much more than a speedy getaway plan. But there is much more than meets the eye when it comes to Kurt Wagner. He has a pretty reasonable amount of strength, too. He is capable of lifting approximately 300 pounds, which is 3 times the size of his body weight. He also has enhanced flexibility and agility, night vision, camouflage abilities, and the ability to cling to surfaces. And he's exhibited a limited unconscious extrasensory spatial awareness. Yeah, this prevents him from teleporting into solid objects within his immediate vicinity, which would be no bueno. Up next, number 5, Madame Web. Madame Web, aka Cassandra Webb, first appeared in 1980's The Amazing Spider-Man issue 210. She is an elderly woman with myasthenia gravis, an illness that affects her nervous system and makes her blind and paraplegic. Her husband had designed a life support system for her, which looks like a spider web. She often acts as a mentor figure to Spider-Man. Now, despite never physically fighting any supervillains, her powers lie in her immense intellect. She is telepathic, a clairvoyant with precognitive powers, and has the ability to see all possible outcomes of a situation. That is power. She can sense the presence of psionic powers in others too. And in addition to this, she can perform a psychic form of surgery on other minds when in need. Those are some pretty valuable abilities. Moving on to number 4, Molly Hayes from The Runaways. With a codename the likes of Princess Powerful, it is no surprise that Runaways member Molly Hayes has been underestimated in the past. Molly, the youngest member of the group, and initially the team's only mutant member, has superhuman strength and invulnerability. This is why she would later adopt the alias of Bruiser. In her earlier days, she would become extremely fatigued after using her powers, generally falling asleep after using them. It took a lot of training and experience to alter that, now being able to use those powers for longer periods of time before exhausting herself, and the effects of those powers are immense. She once toppled a giant monster bigger than a skyscraper, and she's largely believed to be one of Marvel's toughest female superheroes. Moving on to number 3, Mantis. Upon first glance, you can see why some perceive Mantis as weak. Despite being a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers over the years, often Mantis is mistaken as useless, because she doesn't have the more brawny kinds of powers that others do. the likes of superhuman strength, speed, durability, what have you. Instead, Mantis harbors other impressive kinds of power. She is an empath, which gives her the telepathic ability to sense the emotions of others, and in some iterations alter them. Get at you, MCU version. She can instinctively sense weak points in opponents. She once used her knowledge of pressure points to knock Thor, the god of thunder, unconscious. In addition to this, she can also communicate telepathically with the Koltati. She can project energy and astral project, and she can manipulate plants and has an accelerated healing factor. If that still doesn't convince you, go watch Avengers Infinity War. She manages to subdue Thanos' mind in an attempt on Titan to overpower him and steal the gauntlet. It's a collective plan, which failed, thanks to Star-Lord. Remember that? Remember when that was a meme? Yeah. I feel like we've all chilled out in Star-Lord a bit since then, haven't we? Pop culture. Up next at our number 2 spot, Dupe. Dupe is a strange floating creature of unknown origins who speaks in his very own language. He first appeared in X-Force Volume 1, issue 116 in 2001. And for a character who looks like a green pickled thumb with warts, he's crazy powerful. His abilities consist of flight, having an accelerated healing factor, superhuman strength and durability, the ability to replicate physical objects, he is physically malleable, and the most impressive skill of them all, arguably, Dupe has an extra dimensional void within his body that he can store objects and people in. What? Yeah, that's a thing. And he uses it to store an assortment of objects from time to time. He also has a vaguely defined ability to manipulate time and space. He can take on the best of them too. Once Thor tried to hit him with Mjolnir, and Dupe absorbed the hammer into his body, firing out of his mouth back at Thor. In case you're wondering, that went down in the X-Statix vs Avengers storyline in the X-Statix comic. I wish I could be like Dupe and just store all of my camera gear at all times in my body. That'd be so convenient. Finally, in at number 1, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is Marvel's most overrated, underrated character. Not a paradox. If you think about it, it actually makes sense. And she's awesome. So for starters, what can Squirrel Girl do? Well, she has superhuman agility, senses and strength, a prehensile tail, razor-sharp claws, retractable knuckle spikes, and the ability to communicate with squirrels. That latter ability initially made her a bit of a joke, but over the years the character has shown just how resourceful of a superhero she is, and how resourceful her army of squirrels can be. I mean, think about it, an army of anything is still an army. Even if it's squirrels, they got tiny claws and shit, guys. The list of supervillains that Squirrel Girl has defeated is pretty jaw-dropping. She once saved Earth from being consumed by Galactus by having an empathetic, friendly chat with him. She once defeated Thanos. The fight was off panel, but the Watcher confirmed the victory. She once overwhelmed Dr. Doom with her army of squirrels in one of the most humiliating defeats of his to date, saving Iron Man in the process. She was 14 at the time. I feel super unaccomplished. She's highly underestimated in the Marvel Universe, which she works to her advantage.
Number 10, Punisher ends the human race. In the one-shot comic, Punisher: The End, we are introduced to a prison that is executing all of its prisoners in preparation for an upcoming nuclear war, with the guards planning on then hiding out in a bomb shelter that is installed. One of the prisoners is actually Frank Castle, who has grown older and has been caught and locked up. He gets in the shelter before the blast comes, and after a year, he and a companion from the prison exit and start making their way through the wasteland. Frank knows that the radiation levels he is exposing himself to will cause him to die within 72 hours, but keeps moving forwards, eventually getting to his goal, a shelter filled with former billionaires who knew their decisions would lead to an apocalypse and hid themselves away. He prepares to punish them, but the sleazy rich people convince him to spare them long enough to explain the seriousness of the situation to him. The other shelters have fallen silent, and they have the means to continue the species, and if Frank ends them, he will also be ending the human race. Frank then mercilessly and brutally murders everyone, including his companion, before walking into the wastelands to die, happy with his decision, believing nothing good ever came from humanity. It is an interesting book, but it leans so far into the mature rating that characters tend to overindulge in an unnecessary amount of slurs and swears, to the point that it actually somehow makes the whole thing feel more childish than many standard Marvel comics. Number 9, Deadpool Killustrated. The sequel to the first Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe features Deadpool trying to destroy the Marvel Universe by going into other fictional stories that inspired the Marvel heroes in order to prevent any of them from being created. Over the course of the miniseries, we see Deadpool brutally dispatch such classic characters as Don Quixote, the Little Mermaid, Tom Sawyer, the siblings from Little Women, Moby Dick, and the Three Musketeers, while he's pursued through the ideas verse by a team of heroes led by Sherlock Holmes. If you're a fan of these classic characters, it can be really brutal to suddenly see them eviscerated as they scream and cry, asking why this is happening. But the sheer stupidity of it obviously makes it pretty funny. The humor cuts some of the brutality, making this rank pretty low on the list. Number 8, Scramble Gets Free. This next entry is dedicated to one of our commenters, Kevin Hawkins, who has asked that I keep teaching him about Canada's super team, Alpha Flight, so that he can continue to learn about more obscure superheroes in order to help him expand his rather narrow tastes. Sure thing, Kevin, I'll keep the Alpha info coming. The original Alpha Flight series had its fair share of brutal moments, but one that has always stuck in my mind is from issue 30, when Heather accidentally releases Madison Jeffries' evil brother, Lionel, otherwise known as Scramble. Scramble has the mutant power to rearrange organic matter. He originally used this power as an army medic in the Vietnam War, but the trauma of the war drove him insane and he was locked away in a hospital. Once he got free, he used his powers to turn the other patients into deformed and grotesque mounds of mutated flesh that then attacked the heroes. Every design in this issue is wonderfully brutal and disgusting, including the creature that Heather is transformed into. The victims are eventually saved and put back in their original shapes, which makes this a bit less brutal, but it was an especially disturbing issue.
Number 7, Red Hood and Batgirl. Jason Todd and Barbara Gordon are admittedly a super weird ship, at least for me. I'm sure there are some of you out there that really love the idea of this couple, but for me, honestly, it's just weird. Granted, this hookup didn't go as far as some others on our list have. Instead of this being a full-on relationship, a one-night stand, or even just a date, this was merely a profession of love from Jason to Babs. Babs, however, took the opportunity to create some boundaries with Jason. She saw he was hurting and wanted to be there for him as someone who also has shared trauma in regards to her relationship with the Joker, and just in terms of someone who's also a Bat family member, so she's kind of like a sister to him. She felt that this shared experience with the villain was basically clouding Jason's mind somewhat, making him feel closer to her romantically, but without there actually being any other real spark between them or reason for them to be together. And honestly, I gotta say, I agree with Babs on this one. Personally, I like Jason Todd best with Artemis, so I'm here for that ship, but this one, not so much.
Number 6, Human Torch and Victorious. Okay, so when Dr. Doom was looking for a wifey to become Queen of Latveria and help him rule, he chose Victorious, his most loyal follower and herald. She obviously and gladly said yes, but unbeknownst to Dr. Doom, the night before that happened, Victorious and Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, defended Latveria's treasures together and somehow found themselves hooking up after 2 of Johnny's other hookups, Elijah and his galactic soulmate Skye, who also shares a psychic connection with the Human Torch, both just flew away. So the last person you'd expect Johnny Storm to get with is who he gets with. No one said Johnny Storm was the brightest of the Fantastic Four, so of course Johnny still goes to the wedding between Dr. Doom and Victorious, just hooked up with in Fantastic Four Volume 6 issue 33. And he just causes problems, like sneaking out at night to try and see her. Victorious totally tells Doom about the entire encounter, but right in the middle of the wedding ceremony, and Dr. Doom, well, he responds how you would imagine Dr. Doom would respond to that. Badly.
Number 5, Supergirl and Comet. Supergirl and Comet is definitely a weird one. Well, they really only had a brief potential romance, not even a full-on romance. Comet was Supergirl's magical horse. So yeah, I think you can see why this one is weird. I don't know if I really need to justify the awkwardness of this one. Now that being said though, Comet wasn't always a horse. He was accidentally transformed into one. He was actually originally a centaur. I guess that's not that much better, but he was actually going to be turned into a full human. But instead of being turned into a full human, he was accidentally turned into a full horse, which I guess is an easy error to make when you have a centaur. However, when a certain comet flew overhead, he would basically get to be human for a day, which is how he was able to romance Supergirl, albeit, admittedly, quite briefly.
Number 4, Miss Marvel and Marcus. In Avengers 197 from 1980, Carol Danvers, back when she was Miss Marvel, discovers that she is pregnant. She doesn't remember how it happened, and that sweet little baby is growing quick. Not 3 issues later, in Avengers 200, Carol pops the little sucker out within days of even finding out that she was pregnant, and all the Avengers are like weirdly excited about it as if it's not the weirdest thing that just happened, and they treat Carol like she's the unreasonable one for not being excited. The baby, who has been named Marcus, grows up into adulthood in basically hours and reveals that he is actually the son of Immortus, the ruler of Limbo and one of the different incarnations of Kang the Conqueror. Immortus had Marcus with a woman he had apparently plucked out of the time stream, but Marcus was trapped in Limbo until he could be born on Earth. So, Marcus had brought Danvers to Limbo, romanced her with a combination of charm and quote, subtle manipulation from Immortus's machines, and he got Miss Marvel pregnant so that he could be born on Earth as her child.
Number 3, Kraven and Queen Goblin. I mean, it's hard to top that last one, but we're gonna try. What is even happening here? Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I did think Queen Goblin was an interesting character when she first appeared in the comics. She was originally the therapist Ashley Kafka, or at least a clone of the original Ashley Kafka. With her work, she attempted to help Ben Reilly during his time and her time working for Beyond as his therapist, back when he was Spider-Man during the whole Beyond story arc in the Spider-Man comic. However, eventually the Beyond Corporation would be revealed as being surprise, evil, and they would turn Kafka into a villain herself, with her becoming Queen Goblin. Not to be confused with the Goblin Queen, totally different character. And yet this change also resulted in her getting a new villainous beau as well, partnering up with Kraven, or at least, once again, a clone of Kraven, who took the place of his original as his pseudo-son. That's comics for you.
Number 2, Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. The passing of Gwen Stacy at the hands of the Green Goblin is one of the defining moments in Peter Parker's life, and it cemented Green Goblin as one of Peter's most ruthless foes. But then Marvel and J. Michael Straczynski gave us the Sins Past Spider-Man story arc, and specifically Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 512. 2 twin assassins show up in New York on the trail of the Web-Slinger. To cut to the chase, these twins were actually the secret children of Gwen Stacy and frickin' Norman Osborn from when they had an affair, and their birth was suddenly revealed as the whole reason that Norman even offed Gwen in the first place. But Adam, how are these twins around the same age as Peter is? Apparently, it's because of Norman's enhanced blood, which caused them to age quicker than normal. Basically, Marvel decided that ruining the image of Gwen Stacy and slightly devaluing her passing was worth it to create an extremely overcomplicated story arc that goes nowhere and adds nothing but ickiness to the Spider-Man continuity. Gross.
Number 1, Hulk and She-Hulk. I mean, yeah. While there are other more inappropriate familial relationships in comics, honestly, which is weird, but it's true, this one is still one of the worst out there, and it was even hinted at in the main continuity. That's right, we're not just talking about all realities here, although that also happens with these two. At one point, Hulk basically goes into a crazy rage, and it's revealed that it's kinda because Hulk's like basically in heat. Also, I think like super depressed and lonely, and so he goes into heat. I don't know. She-Hulk attempts to calm him down, and as a result, he attempts to catch her and mate with her. Fortunately, this doesn't end up happening, but the other messed up part of this whole thing is that a part of Hulk's mating ritual seems to be to like actually cause harm to She-Hulk. I mean, there's messed up, and then there's the Hulk level of messed up, and this is definitely the latter of those.
Coming in at number 10 today, it's Luke Cage's impenetrable skin. Thanks to the super soldier experiment known as the Burstein process, Luke Cage Power Man does have incredible strength, stamina, and a healing factor, but he is pretty much most known for the fact that he is protected by indestructible, impenetrable, super dense skin. That is an awesome power to have. Luke is protected from almost anything with this titanium-like skin, but the problem here is that this natural shield isn't just shielding him from the outside. Whenever Luke Cage is internally injured, which is rarely, the character requires more than almost anyone else ever would. It's next to impossible to perform surgery on Luke Cage unless you happen to have access to an overpowered medical laser. The natural ways someone might be healed from some kind of internal injury do not apply, as doctors can't even cut through Cage's skin to begin the procedure in the first place. As you can imagine, this can be pretty problematic.
And at 50% off sales, Captain Margaret Elizabeth, or Peggy Carter, was a distinguished Avenger and founding member of the Illuminati, who played a crucial role in the Infinity War of 2018 of our world, where she valiantly fought against Thanos and aided during the Battle of Titan. In the aftermath, when Doctor Strange utilized the Darkhold for dreamwalking, resulting in a multiversal threat of, incursions, Carter, along with the rest of the Illuminati, voted in favor of executing him to safeguard their universe. In the years that followed, Carter found herself residing over a hearing concerning an alternate version of Doctor Strange who was apprehended by Baron Mordo on suspicions of posing a similar danger. Before the vote could be finalized though, to condemn this alternate Doctor Strange, their headquarters came under attack by the Scarlet Witch. Carter and her fellow Illuminati confronted her, but tragically she met her demise when Scarlet Witch used her own shield to cut her in half, hence the 50% off sale. The amount of times that Cap has caught his shield though makes me question why Carter was able to be cut in half by hers.
Number 8. Chickens, or electorophobia. The mutant Domino is pretty darn unique. Her mutant ability allows her to subliminally and psionically initiate random kinetic phenomena that affect probability in her favor by making improbable, but importantly not impossible, things to occur within her line of sight. What does that mean? Basically she has good luck. Really good luck. So how do you give a weakness to someone with such a strange and honestly powerful power as luck? Easy. You make her absolutely terrified of chickens. Now, obviously not a lot of people are running across chickens very often, and I think that holds true for superheroes, but for someone with such super-powered luck as Domino, she runs into chickens more than should be acceptable, and that's pretty unlucky because her fear of chickens is quite debilitating. Number 7. Sins Past. Look, I hate talking about this as much as you hate hearing about it, but Marvel did it, and I don't think we should forget that. The passing of Gwen Stacy at the hands of the Green Goblin is one of the defining moments in Peter Parker's life, and it cemented Green Goblin as one of Peter's most ruthless foes. Then, Marvel and J. Michael Straczynski gave us the Sins Past Spider-Man story arc, and specifically, Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 512. Two twin assassins show up in New York on the trail of the Webslinger, and to cut to the chase, these twins were actually the secret children of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn, from when they had an affair, and their birth was suddenly revealed as the whole reason that Norman even took out Gwen in the first place. But the question is, how are these twins around the same age as Peter? Apparently, it's because of Norman's enhanced blood, which caused them to age quicker than normal. Basically, Marvel decided that ruining the image of Gwen Stacy and slightly devaluing her passing was worth it to create an extremely overcomplicated arc that goes nowhere and adds nothing but ickiness to the Spider-Man continuity, and then it got retconned. Number 6. Marriage. The wedding of Batman and Catwoman was a big deal. It was teased at and built up for a long time. Fans were genuinely excited to see it happen and to see what would come next after the fact. A kid of Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne would be awesome. At least it would be awesome, but sadly the wedding that was so coveted never came to be. Batman issue 50 came and went, and following suit, so did Catwoman. She came and went from Bruce, literally leaving the groom at the altar. Batman was marrying Catwoman so he could actually be happy. And after some convincing words from criminals like the Joker and her friend Holly, Catwoman believed that if Bruce Wayne was happy, then Batman couldn't be Batman. Which, one, that's just depressing, but two, both the Joker and Holly, alongside Riddler, Gotham Girl, Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne Batman, and other villains, were actually working for Bane, who was manipulating events in order to break Batman emotionally and give rise to the City of Bane event. It certainly sent Batman down a path of absolute despair. He became much more drastic with his fighting of criminals, particularly an innocent Mr. Freeze, and he even donned a less advanced version of his Batsuit that he would just take more of a beating. It's just sad. Number 5. Spider-Man's black suit. Spider-Man's red and blue classic suit is extremely iconic, and I don't think anyone thinks that it's bad. The Sam Raimi version of that suit is beautiful, but the black spider suit that appeared in Secret Wars? Whew, that suit was something else. If you tell me that you don't like this one, you are a liar, and 2, we cannot be friends. This suit was actually designed by a guy called Randy Schuler for a contest that Marvel had, and they paid him $220 for it. $220 for one of the most fan-beloved Spider-Man suits of all time. $220 for what would eventually become one of Spider-Man's greatest villains and eventually one of Marvel's most popular anti-heroes, Venom. It's the best investment that they ever made. The black symbiote suit was so great and so popular that Marvel even came up with excuses for Peter to get a regular cloth version of the suit made by his girlfriend, Black Cat. That was not a brain-consuming symbiote and just had the benefit of stealth, intimidation, and looking sexy. And at number 4 today is Bialia. Black Adam does not give a damn. The only things he has shown to care about are himself, his family, and his country. He has ripped someone in half as a warning to not mess with Kahndaq, which is his country. He has obliterated Psycho Pirate's face for manipulating his own mind, and he took on almost the entire superhuman community in the World War III event. But the whole catalyst for that last one was because he completely decimated the entire innocent population of the country of Bialia. The science squad of Oolong Island, it's a weird name I know, created the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse for the express purpose of wiping out the Black Marvel family. Now after the passing of Isis and Osiris, Black Adam's direct family, he hunted the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse to take revenge. This brought him to the country of Bialia. Now when he couldn't find the Horsemen, his rage and frustration got the better of him and he essentially attacked the whole frickin' country. Adam's rampage ended countless innocent people's existences. It was easily his most terrible act as they had done absolutely nothing wrong and he was just blinded by cold hard rage. Number 3. Mar-Vell. Mar-Vell of the Kree was Marvel Comics' original Captain Marvel, and he was also the first Marvel superhero to permanently pass away when he succumbed to cancer in 1982's The Death of Captain Marvel. That was a huge moment in comic book lore, and he remains to be one of the only heroes to have passed away and not get resurrected. The character has reappeared as visions or in flashbacks and obviously in alternate realities, but he never came back really. One of the coolest and most unexpected ways he did reappear, however, was in the alternate universe which became known as the Cancerverse. It's just a really cool and creative idea. Basically, on his infamous deathbed, the Many-Angled Ones contact and corrupt the dying Mar-Vell, granting him new powers which he used to transmute the other heroes, and with Mar-Vell as their lord, they completely took down the Avatar of Death, which in turn completely destroyed Death itself, stopping people from ever actually passing away. This, in turn, allowed the Many-Angled Ones to invade this reality, and it became a nightmare. Number 2. Invincible Ultimatum. David Anders, aka Dinosaurus, appearing in the Invincible comic book series, is an interesting villain. While he does incredibly evil things, he is genuinely trying to save the world and the human race from climate change and the fact that we are destroying our own planet and resources. Following in the logic of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, he has done some truly awful things, like destroying the entirety of Las Vegas. But still, Invincible saw the good in this villain, somehow, and he decided to team up with him anyways. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. From Invincible issue 98 to 100, we got an event called The Death of Everyone. Mark had been affected by the Scourge virus and had temporarily lost his powers. Because of this, Dinosaurus took things into his own hands, distracting Invincible and the other heroes with devices in Los Angeles that caused earthquakes. Meanwhile, his real plan was to detonate devices all over Greenland, melting ice and leading to a massive rise in sea level, wiping out thousands of people living in the world's coastal cities. This leads to a massive fight between Mark and Dinosaurus, during the climax of which Dino completely ends Mark by squishing his head till it pops. Now it turns out the person who Dinosaurus squished and ripped apart was actually a very convincing clone that he swapped out for Invincible mid-fight to make the world think that Mark was hard deleted from life. And finally, in at number 1 today is Marvel vs. DC. Marvel Comics and DC Comics have for a long time been the 2 biggest comic book companies that we have, but the 90s were a rough time for comics. To help fight abysmal sales, the 2 companies staged a crossover. When 2 entities known as the Brothers, the embodiments of both the Marvel and DC multiverses, remembered each other's existence due to some multiversal and reality-based tomfoolery, they pitted combatants from their respective realities together to decide who was better and who should be destroyed. This gave us the 1996 series called simply DC vs. Marvel. Heroes and villains across both universes ended up facing off. Storm faced off against Wonder Woman, Superman fought the Hulk, and for whatever reason, Robin faced off against the X-Men Jubilee. I don't know. DC vs. Marvel was shameless fan service, and no one cared because it was awesome. Sure, it wasn't particularly that well written or drawn, but whatever. As a solution to the conflict, the Living Tribunal from Marvel and the Spectre from DC joined forces and combined the two universes together, creating the Amalgam Universe. A universe that had its own unique history and was a combination of both DC and Marvel with mashed together characters like Darkclaw. A crossover like this hadn't happened before, and it probably won't ever happen again. But I, for one, am just glad that it happened at all.
Number 10. What if Jane Foster had found the Hammer of Thor? This one isn't so strange for the premise, but it's more bizarre because of where the premise took us in the end. This is a story we've also seen adapted to the main continuity, though fortunately it does not quite share this same ending, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Jane ends up finding the Hammer of Thor and becoming the goddess of storms, taking up the mantle Thordis. Lady Sif, missing Thor, ends up finding and falling in love with Donald Blake, who is later revealed, of course, to be the true Thor when Odin asks Thordis to return his hammer to him. As thanks for her service, however, Odin makes Jane a goddess. However, as Jane was in love with Donald, who is now Thor and is in love with Lady Sif, her heart is broken, and she has to be returned to her mortal self because of this. But Odin has a better solution and proposes to Jane, who agrees, to marry him, and then they all live happily ever after. With Jane finding that those very qualities she both admired and loved in the mortal Don Blake are also to be found in the father of immortal Thor. My goodness. That's a very strange ending to that story. How about instead of being with my son, you be with me, his father, haha. Okay, Odin, what? I feel like I like it better when Odin just doesn't really like Jane. I think that works more. Is that weird? Number 9. What if the Avengers were the last superheroes on Earth? This story allows us to imagine what the world would be like if all the superpowered beings on Earth were defeated by the Avengers. At the behest of the Scarlet Centurion, the Avengers attempt to eradicate all superpowered beings, including themselves. In the end, after all threats have been defeated, they decide to disband, being the last ones with powers, in order to usher in an era of peace on Earth. They all go off to live their own normal-ish lives. Thor returns to Asgard, Tony returns to being a billionaire playboy in Las Vegas, only to realize that it doesn't really bring him any joy and actually considers entering into politics. And Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym actually seem to find quite a bit of happiness, going off and getting married and focusing on their time with one another, which is kind of sweet. I guess if they weren't superheroes it would work out pretty well for them. Scarlet Centurion does return to threaten Earth and forces the Avengers to come together one more time, but after defeating him, they once again go their separate ways back into retirement. And they also kind of question, like, if being a superhero is actually a bad thing, because does it create more problems than it solves? Just a quick reminder, if you love these what if lists, I personally love bringing them to you because these stories are amazing. Be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all the things. Number 8. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? This story comes to us from volume 2 of the What If series that started back in 1989. In issue 71, we get to imagine a reality where instead of just one Hulk, or the members of the Hulk family plus Hulk, we had 1,000 of them, which I would say is ultimately too many Hulks. In this story, it was the bombing on Hiroshima that resulted in these thousands of Hulks coming into existence, survivors of the attack that were basically mutated, so they became Hulks. In the end, Bruce Banner, aka Hulk, who of course goes on to become the Hulk in the story, must attempt to stand up against this army and attempt to defeat it with the help of some friends.
Number 7. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. What if Volume 2, number 24 takes the story of Uncanny X-Men number 159, in which Dracula has drunk just enough from Storm to gain control of her mind, but instead, in What If, he drinks enough to completely turn her into a member of the undead. As an evil, unstoppable vampire, Storm turns all the other X-Men into vampires as well. But thanks to Wolverine's healing factor and berserker powers, he is able to resist the complete mind control of Dracula and beheads the Vampire King. Now, after either turning or delifing almost all the other heroes and having the US turned into a quarantine zone, the only hero left to stop Wolverine, Vampire Lord, has found his perfect vessel after traveling the astral plane. Doctor Strange's spirit and Frank Castle, the Punisher, kind of sort of merged together, and being the most accomplished vampire hunter, Frank dispatches quite a few vamps before Kitty Pryde attempts to split the two before being separated from her head. This, of all things, snaps Wolverine out of it, and he gets to the Darkhold and destroys himself and every single other vampire. Wow, what a roller coaster of emotion. Number 6, Fantastic Four as cosmonauts. Let's explore the what if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian? Well, for starters, their name is different. In fact, they're pretty much all different. Now, the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudian Richards, the commie Red Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, who is now Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin, who is still just Colossus and has all those powers except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, Piotr's sister Ilyana Rasputina, who seems to have the powers of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool than the 616 continuity. After the demise of Stalin, the team is put under KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of the team, is not having it, especially after he accidentally ends the life of Giant Man. Widowmaker makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero teams go on to fight for freedom and equality. But that isn't how you thought it would go. I didn't. Number 5. Daredevil is bullied and just gives up. One day, when fighting against Electro with Spider-Man, Daredevil is unaffected by a blinding flare set off right in front of his face by Electro. This kind of clues in Electro to the idea that maybe this Daredevil guy is already blind. And when Electro and Spider-Man ask Daredevil what color Electro's costume is, it seals the deal. Electro lets the whole world know by leaking this info to the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man actually sort of makes fun of him, saying it makes sense why he chose that yellow costume, because he couldn't see how bad it was, you know? Villains begin to take advantage of the massive weakness for Daredevil, and while he is able to hold his own still, he eventually decides to undergo an experimental treatment that restores his sight but removes his super senses. Now powerless, Matt Murdock and Karen Page get married and have a normal life, with Matt becoming the district attorney. Wow, kind of a nice ending there. Number 4, Limo Man. In one of those many crazy panels in number 34 of What If, remember that one where the Watcher is a comedian? We get to see a single panel that asks the question, what if Tony Stark owned an auto company instead of a weapons company? Now, whoever was writing this panel was absolutely cooking with gas. They knew what was up. Basically, if that was the case, then the world would get to interact with Limo Man, a hero with a license plate, belt, tire pauldrons, with rear view mirror horns, headlights on his chest, and a sweet pair of rollerblades. He is honestly the least cool Transformer you have ever seen. He does look like he's made up of a luxury car though, so I guess that gives him some kind of arbitrary style points. Right? At least the robber he seems to be facing seems to be a little bit worried. Number 3, 6-armed Spider-Man. In the legit continuity, Spider-Man undergoes an experiment to try and get rid of his spider abilities. Instead, he gains 2 extra sets of arms. Great success! In the original universe, he uses a serum with the blood of the living vampire Morbius to revert back to his normal self. But in What If number 42, Morbius is eaten by sharks, because of course he is. And Spider-Man is doomed to retain his 8 limbs. Ultimately, this Spider-Man learns that maybe these limbs are not a curse, but actually give him a buff in his agility and attack power. He is even able to save Gwen Stacy from her demise. Looks like someone rolled a natural 20. He was so popular that he went on to actually go on to be included in a few multiversal Spider events. So honestly, a great, if not weird, version of Spider-Man. Number 2, Dazzler, Herald of Galactus. Dazzler is already weird without being in a What If story. She's a collab between Marvel and a record label. That's all I have to say. Okay, so Dazzler's power is that she can convert sound into light. Pretty good for a disco singer. And especially so since she uses this power to literally dazzle people at her concerts. In What If number 33 though, Dazzler is chosen as the new Herald of Galactus, being the only being who could retrieve the old Herald who hid in a black hole, which she does. And then, in the alternate timeline, Galactus sends him back into the black hole as a punishment? I don't know, okay? She was given a huge boost with the power cosmic, and for some reason, even with her new boosted up powers, she decides to keep the disco ball rollerblades. She's actually really torn up about having to leave her world, but she vows to at least do good by not letting Galactus eat inhabited planets, which Galactus actually obliges because, well, it seems like he's got the hots for Dazzler, or whatever the world-eating equivalent of the hots is. There is a whole conflict with an armada, and then Galactus releases her to go back to Earth, which has been the victim of an apocalypse in her absence, and she goes back to him yet again as some kind of weird, twisted, intergalactic love story. I don't know, it's really strange. Number 1, Jane Foster becomes Thor. But Adam, this happens in the 616 continuity. Yes, but this one's a little bit different. In this what if story, number 10 actually, it is Jane Foster who first picks up the hammer Mjolnir, not Donald Blake. In this story, Jane accompanies Dr. Blake on his trip to Norway, and when he drops his cane into a ravine, she goes down there to get it for him instead. Striking the stick, she becomes Thordis. Yes, Thordis. Unlike the modern interpretation, a female wielding Mjolnir gets an entirely new name. Wielding the power of Thor, Thordis fights off the Saturn Rock people, and then turns the cane that she seems to have stolen from Donald Blake, leaving him helpless without a cane, into a hairbrush to better fit in with her feminine alter ego, because men don't use hairbrushes apparently. She has pretty much the same adventures as Thor. She's rejected by Odin, and Sif gets with Donald Blake, until the events of Ragnarok when Odin decides to give the hammer back to Blake because he can't accept Jane as Thor. And then, as thanks, he turns Jane into a different god and then marries her? Kinda gross, kinda really strange, kind of uncomfortable. Luckily, it's only a story that comes from the question, what if?
Leapfrog. This spring-loaded villain appears in the What If that has Aunt May gaining Spider-Man's powers instead of Peter Parker. And before you jump down my throat, Leapfrog does appear in other comics first, I know this, actually first showing up in Daredevil number 25, but this iteration of the character is clearly meant to be more slapstick and ridiculous than he normally is, which is saying a lot, considering this must be one of the silliest villains in Marvel. But case in point, his first appearance in this What If issue shows him crashing through a brick wall and just swearing at everybody, screaming expletives as he bounces past a group of civilians and a news reporter. He ends up in a battle with Aunt May's Spider-Woman and gets thwarted by nothing other than a stretchy mass of dough that Aunt May uses to lasso him into a tree. He's just clearly such a dumb villain and appears for what I could only imagine was comedic value to the already hysterical What If issue.
Number 9, Ghost Grandpa. While technically Ghost Riders are supposed to be heroes, this one doesn't seem to be too nice in terms of the brief glimpse that we see of him. And it's because of that I decided to include him as a kind of like a low-key villain. Ghost Grandpa makes his appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34, where we ask the question, what if Ghost Rider had possessed someone else? Instead of Johnny Blaze, of course. The answer allows us to take a look at a few different candidates, including Ghost Skater and Ghost Baby, but while both talk about punishing evildoers and getting vengeance, Ghost Grandpa only seems to be interested in getting revenge on his nurse for delaying his glass of warm milk.
Number 8 is Wolverine, Lord of Vampires. This villain is bizarre because it's the embodiment of a character we've all known forever, but who doesn't really exhibit any of his typical traits. In What If number 24, Wolverine takes on the Lord of Vampires, who tries to bite him to turn Wolverine into a vampire himself. And since Wolverine was too badass to simply be turned into a vampire, he decides it's only in his character to kill the guy. And he does, but what happens when you kill the Lord of Vampires is that you take on the title yourself. And this is when Wolverine starts to change into a very strange version of himself. Right away, Wolverine starts turning his former friends into vampires, with his demeanor totally shifting as he uses like mind control powers on them, which is just pretty strange on its own. Honestly, this is what it is. It's just weird seeing Wolverine without any level of humanity in him anymore. Something about this transformation doesn't seem right and gives me some very conflicting feelings towards the whole thing. Although I gotta say, he does turn out to be pretty powerful Lord of Vampires. He even takes out Doctor Strange in a harrowing battle, which says a lot for Wolverine on its own. This suggests that the power level This suggests that his power level is pretty heavily increased after getting the title of Lord of Vampires. Doesn't change the pop collar and bat-eared hairdo though. This is a list about weird villains, not powerful ones. Although he might end up on both, he still ranks on this one for sure. I mean, just look at him.
Number 7. Civil War Captain America. Honestly, I'm kind of a fan of this what if story, but it does have some strange moments and twists on characters you might not expect. For example, the story starts out with our Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes time displaced to the Civil War era. Bucky is the commander of the regiment and he is not a good guy. Apart from being an unhealthy amount of racist, he has quite the lack of moral compass. Our Steve obviously starts out as his scrawny and less than impressive self, but with a heart that shines through as strong and good. After sustaining injuries from not following his commander's orders, he is recovering in a nearby Union camp tended to by a Private Wilson, taken in by the Shawnee at a young age. Sensing the goodness in his heart, Wilson bestows a kind of eagle animal spirit on Mr. Rogers that makes you on the outside whatever you are on the inside. And this happens just as Barnes stumbles upon their location. The power of the ritual blasts Barnes away, and when we see his face, he has become the White Skull, which, I mean, you could just call him Skull, because skulls are white, you know, but whatever. And Steve has become a mystical super soldier wielding a shield and sporting a headdress. He goes on to save presidents and leaves a lasting legacy of Captain and General Americas that continues all the way to the modern day. It's pretty sweet. Number 6. Spider-Man Punisher. On Earth 71928, or the What If Peter Parker Became the Punisher story, Peter's life remained pretty much the same as Earth 616 Peter. That is, until Uncle Ben's life was drawn to a close, and in response, Peter dispatched the robber who did the deed. In a very Punisher-like decision, Peter decided to deal with crime from this point on by any means necessary. Meaning, he started de-lifing criminals. Peter tried to avoid this at first, trying to go his normal route, but since criminals are criminals, and they always come back, and he knows how much easier of a solution it is to just take them out Punisher style, he went full force into that lifestyle. The easy solution, in my opinion, is not the heroic solution, but hey, that's how it goes. He carried the blam blam that took out Uncle Ben's life, as well as other weaponry and multiple different types of ammunition. His suit also took a skull logo instead of the traditional spider logo. Not because they want him to look like the Punisher, but due to the fact that the spider that gave him his powers was a noble false widow, which has a cephalothorax that looks like a skull. That's the reason. Not because the Punisher. Stop. Stop, he's not the Punisher, stop. Number 5. What if Ghost Rider was a baby? I know we keep pulling from this one, but that damn What If the Watcher was a stand-up comedian, What If comic, it's honestly the gift that just keeps on giving. There is a full page devoted to the question of what if the Ghost Rider had possessed someone else, someone other than Johnny Blaze. And of course, instead of finding some other able-bodied man or woman, a cigarette-smoking, leather vest-wearing Watcher shows us the spirit of vengeance inhabiting the body of an elderly woman in a wheelchair demanding warm milk, a rollerblade-wearing woman vowing to bring an end to disco, and an infant in a stroller. A big-headed goo-goo gaga who will hunt for vengeance after it finds someone to change its diaper. And just to make it 10 times better, this wee bab is wielding a cat, swinging around its head as it zooms around its Hellfire stroller. I can't make this up. I honestly can't. Number 4. Barbarian Hulk. Alright, this one requires a bit of unpacking. So, in issue 23 of What If, the Incredible Hulk has fallen in love with a woman named Jarella, a green-skinned queen from the subatomic world of Kai, who was brought back to our world when the Hulk was unshrunk. In regular continuity, she is laid to rest after sacrificing herself to save a boy from some rubble during a Hulk battle. But in this story, she lives, and the Hulk and Jarella are shrunk again so they can go and live happily ever after, on the subatomic level in the Kingdom of Kai. Now, Kai, for some reason, is very medieval / Roman / ancient in general, and Hulk, who now possesses his full intelligence, becomes king alongside Jarella. Soon, a dark plot by some dark gods and their dark minions rears its ugly head, and Hulk, alongside a group of other subatomic barbaric heroes, goes to thwart them, facing off against a second Savage Hulk that seems to have just been dispatched in like 2 comic panels. And that's where it ends. I'm assuming Hulk just stays subatomic and never returns to Earth, living as a microscopic barbarian for the rest of his life. Please check out this story. Number 3. Doom! Sorry. What would a good guy version of one of the strongest, most quotable, and most villainous villains in the pages of Marvel look like? Well, in issue 22 of What If, we get to see just that. When the Victor Von Doom of this universe discovers Reed Richards looking over his experiment notes, uninvited, he instead invites Reed to come help him out, which I think a true scientist would do. With Reed's help, he's able to contact his mother in the afterlife and learns of his royal blood. He trains in the advanced technology and mystical arts of an order of monks in Tibet and in the darkest places of sorcery, and is granted, instead of his classic armor, this really sweet golden armor evocative of knights. I think he looks pretty cool, but that's just me. He uses his knowledge to free his mother's soul from the realm of Mephisto, and uses his technology and sorcery to free his kingdom from an oppressive ruler. And all goes really well, until Mephisto comes back demanding the soul of his lover Valeria in exchange for the freedom of his people. Then he battles Mephisto once every year to try and save his love. It was almost a happy ending. Number 2, Spider Actor. A second Spider-Man What If on this list? Oh my. In this What If number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life. That simple act robs Peter of the lesson of the responsibility of having great power, and instead, he turns to a life in the public eye. Now, as an actor, Peter turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation almost at any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a little bit. Well, it wasn't really that cool. When JJ exposes him to the public though, we see a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man, when he threatens him and eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite him when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. It is only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn that old power and responsibility thing. But man, Peter's a bit of a snob this way, I don't like it. Number 1, Fantastic Four. In the very first What If comic, the question that is posed is pretty simple. What if, instead of rejecting Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four instead let Spider-Man join? Marvel's most popular family adopting Marvel's favorite hero? A match made in heaven. The Fantastic Five go on to fight crime and supervillains. That is, until the battle with Namor the Submariner. In this alternate reality, at the end of this battle, Sue Storm feels kind of cast to the wayside, with more focus being put upon Peter and the other members of the team, and she leaves with Namor and becomes his bride. It completely stops the marriage of Reed and Sue from ever happening, which is just a weird, unnatural world to see. We don't like it. But life goes on, and the new Fantastic Four featuring Spider-Man go on with their lives. Number 10. Ice Giant Thor. A perfect what if tale. It's almost surprising it wasn't done before this point. In What If Thor in 2018, we get the story of what if Thor was raised by frost giants. Laufey, the king of the frost giants, defeats Odin in their battle so long ago. And just as Odin took the infant Loki, Laufey takes the kid Thor and raises him as his own. Loki is obviously here too, and like usual, they form a pretty tight bond as adopted brothers. Unfortunately, due to Thor's strength and skill in battle, not to mention his fondness for summoning the power of lightning, he is praised among the frost giants and by Laufey himself, who begins to completely forget Loki, his actual true son. Instead, Loki finds the captured Freya in the dungeons, and she teaches him how to use magic. Loki eventually busts her out of prison, and together they attempt to escape to Midgard. They go to the ruins of Asgard and attempt to repair the Rainbow Bridge, until Thor and Laufey show up. Loki ends the life of his father, while Thor unknowingly ends his mother with a blast from his giant ice hammer, Ice Crusher. Thor almost takes out his brother as well, but at the last minute, he lets him go. We don't know what happens next, only that Loki went to Midgard, had kids and a family, and apparently became a hero. It ends on a rather sweet note though. Number 9. Man-Spider. Okay, so in this story, everything that happens to Spider-Man is exactly the same. Oh, sorry, I left out the extremely important detail that in What If number 8 in 1978, this isn't Peter Parker, it's Webster Weaver, an anthropomorphized spider in a world of other animal people. Oh yes, and he gets bit by a radioactive human, giving this spider the proportional powers of a human. Apart from that, and the villains being hilarious alternate versions like Marvin the Hunter, Culture Vulture, Rude Rhino, the Green Gobbler, King Pig, Octodoctopus, and Leaping Lizard, everything is just the same as it always is. Until one day, Ray's the Bug Spray Baron threatened to destroy the ozone unless he was given $1 trillion. Turns out Ray's is the guy who defeated Webster's Uncle Uncle Bug. Man Spider saves the day, Ray's is destroyed, and he swings back home to Aunt Mayfly. Okay, yes, it's totally different, but a lot of story beats are still the same, so there's that. Number 8. Mustang. What if 114 posed us the question, what if heroes didn't leave the battle world? The answer? They make babies! While there are a few super kids in this story, the one I found to be the strangest was Mustang. Mustang is Clint Barton Jr., and I bet you'll never guess who his father is. His mother, on the other hand, again, not surprising if you just look at him, is Jennifer Walters, the She-Hulk. So, with these two avenging parents, that leaves Mustang with a super strength that isn't quite on She-Hulk's level, and an affinity for using bows. I'm sorry, it's just an odd combo to me. He's a bit taller than almost everyone else too, which makes sense. So I'm guessing this gives him the ability to use bigger bows with much higher tensile strength? So he can shoot bigger arrows? He can fire them much faster? Look, I'm not saying these powers aren't helpful or cool. I mean, super strength is a classic. They're just odd when they're put together. Also, why Mustang? Number 7. What if Aunt May died instead of Uncle Ben? Ready to be depressed? Great. Because in this what if story, we are given a first-hand look at what happens to Peter if Aunt May was the one to lose her life instead of Uncle Ben. Peter, fueled by rage, goes after her killer and ends his life, but unexpectedly, Uncle Ben shows up, and he takes the fall for Peter, going to jail. Now, Peter is going through life with no real moral center to help guide him, and he hates the idea of being Spider-Man. He becomes a bit of a troubled kid. He goes to juvenile prison, escapes, lives on the street, and when he is almost at his breaking point, he tries to break Uncle Ben out of prison. Instead of going with him though, Uncle Ben convinces Peter to make Aunt May proud. Peter takes it to heart. He fixes his life. He meets Mary Jane. He focuses on school, being a hero when the world really needs him, and eventually Ben gets out of prison on good behavior, and that's when we finally get the power and responsibility speech, which leads to Peter becoming Spider-Man more permanently. And with Uncle Ben as a Spider-Man version of Bruce Wayne's Alfred, he goes on to become the hero New York deserves. Number 6. Thaddeus Hulk Ross. So it turns out that if Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross were the one to save Rick Jones from the Gamma Bomb and become irradiated and become the Hulk, he wouldn't last very long at all. That's what happens in What If General Ross had become the Hulk. Gamma affects everyone differently, as the Watcher tells us, and for the General, he immediately turns into a Hulk, but retained his intelligence only without being able to properly speak or really handle the situations he was now in properly. For example, he accidentally completely squashed Rick Jones. He stopped Igor, the Russian spy who caused the Gamma explosion, but also caused untold damage in the process. And after fighting the military, it turns out he threw a tank that traveled all the way to the house of Betty Ross' daughter. The tank he threw crushed the house with Betty inside. He went to find her as she would be the only one who's able to actually help him in this situation that he's in, and instead all he found was the result of what he had done, and a weeping Bruce Banner. Ross transforms back into his regular form, which allows Bruce to pull out a weapon and end the life of this now tormented Ross. I'm sorry, I know this didn't end on a particularly happy note. This is, I guess, the more depressing story than that Spider-Man one. Number 5. Ghost Rider. Honestly, not even sure how this makes sense, but in this What If comic, Marvel, the comic company, exists as a comic book company that writes all the same comics it normally would, including comic books about Ghost Rider Robbie Reyes, who also happens to be an intern at Marvel in this story, but is also still Ghost Rider. Look, I never said that these things had to make sense, okay? What is honestly even weirder is that the studios of Marvel are being visited by this Nordic death metal band called Hassenwald from Latveria, who have fun clubs all over the world, including in Wakanda. Oh, and they also have been accused of witchcraft, church burning, and eating people. It turns out to all be true, as while they are visiting Marvel, they sacrifice the donkey who runs the printing press and use its blood to create possessed Ghost Rider comics that turn the world into a hellscape, making them the ultimate rulers of it, using the power of the old gods to do so. Now, Robbie Reyes is trapped in this hellscape world where Hassenwald has dispatched the Marvel Universe and he needs to save it. Number 4. Magneto Domino in cyberspace. From one utterly bonkers story to another. At least this one's a bit better. In What If X-Men, we have a really strange alternate world. A post-apocalyptic one, but one that's gone completely digital, and humanity's mutations lie in their internet connection rather than in their DNA, with mutants having the EXE gene instead of the X gene. This issue follows two very different versions of Domino and Cable as they are tasked by Xavier to rescue Eric, aka Magneto, a digital entrepreneur taken hostage. Except he isn't a good guy. Surprise. No, he is actually masterminding a whole digital coup, but using his powers and Domino, Xavier connects to Eric, takes over his body and mind, and erases him from cyber existence. At least that's what I gathered when I was reading it. I really have no idea what the heck is happening here. It's really strange, but you should definitely check it out. Number 3, Iron Man the Traitor? In one of the first ever What Ifs, when Iron Man is famously captured and forced to create weapons, he still creates the Iron Man armor, but the change comes when instead of booting up and busting his way out of there, he is held captive. The boot up sequence takes too long, and Jensen's sacrifice doesn't buy him enough time. Tony is found and restrained before he can do anything. Now that he has been found and this new weapon, the Iron Man armor, is discovered, the leader of the terror organization, Chen Lu, plants a device in the arc reactor that keeps Tony alive that allows him to shut it off remotely if Tony doesn't do what they say. And he implants a communication device in Tony's skull so that Chen Lu can spy on and control Tony. Then he lets him be discovered and he goes back to being like normal Tony Stark. But thanks to the fact that he can now control Tony, he forces him to become a hero, like he would have anyways, gain the trust of the superhero community, and then learn secrets pertaining to S.H.I.E.L.D. But it's once Tony is ordered to dispatch Reed Richards and goes to complete the mission that it's revealed that Tony had been recording a tape by speaking incredibly slowly, and he sent that tape to Reed, who, when he played it at a faster speed, learned of the situation Iron Man was in. So once their fight began, Iron Man eventually got incapacitated by Reed, who actually helped him remove the device inside Tony's heart, giving Tony the chance to get his revenge. It's kind of a weird way of doing that. Number 2, New Fantastic Four. What If This Was the Fantastic Four is a comic that was a tribute to illustrator Mike Wieringo, who unexpectedly passed away while working on this story. And even if that wasn't the case, it is still one of my favorite what ifs. The original Fantastic Four is brought to an end by the Skrull agent Delilah, and in their place, a team of 4 heroes step up to the plate, if not with a bit of reluctance. Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Incredible Hulk, and Ghost Rider. Ben Grimm was the only member of the original team who survived, and at their funeral, he gave this new team his blessing while he went off to raise Franklin Richards. This new team came under attack from cosmic beings who seemed to sense the Earth losing one of its major teams. But this was all orchestrated by Dr. Doom, as I'm sure no one is surprised by. Thanks to Ghost Rider's inclusion on the team though, Mephisto uses Doom and possesses him, and creates a team of the hero's villains who are power boosted with infernal magic. So Venom, Abomination, Sabretooth, and Sandman. This fearsome four, as they call themselves, do battle with the new team, eventually being defeated, revealing the Mephisto-possessed Doom, who almost destroys the team until he is stopped by a combined effort of the citizens of New York and Spider-Man utilizing the Disruptor that finish off the Fantastic Four to save the people of New York, Dr. Doom, and the day. Nice. Number 1, Thanos. Okay, so bear with me here. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Using the gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible father from the past to show him the things he has done in an attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he never had, and still doesn't. Honestly. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little sadder given the fact that it was his fault Norman even turned out this way in the first place. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, the entire team has been destroyed. As Norman is trying to figure out exactly what has happened here, it's revealed that Thanos is the one who's done it, and he's shown up to collect the gauntlet. Thanos is incredibly awesome, but unfortunately, not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, and he is dispatched, but not before he tells Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who will never give it to him. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Norman loses his mind, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space, which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox, and he and this world he created fade into emptiness. So yes, Thanos is the hero here in a very weird roundabout way.
Number 10. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? What else would Spidey get up to? Well, in the long run, he basically ends up as a kind of television personality, an actor, and a producer. Spider-Man makes movies that he stars in as an action hero, but still keeps his identity a secret. In the end, he works toward promoting other vigilantes through films that he produces, and still ends up getting involved in crime fighting of sorts. A ton of villains in the form of the Sinister Six end up fighting against him. Well, really they end up fighting against Daredevil, and then Spider-Man's like, Daredevil, help me. But in the end, he's like, I gotta help because Daredevil's just one guy, and he doesn't really have superpowers in the same way that Spider-Man does. Included in this Sinister Six team-up is J. Jonah Jameson, who blames Spider-Man for the destruction of his life and his paper. In the end, Spider-Man realizes that he really mucked up by using his powers for gain instead of for good, which, fair. But he did have a really sweet cape, so there is that. Number 9. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? The story that started it all off. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four is what if that in theory doesn't really sound too crazy until you realize what happens as a result. Spider-Man initially attempted to impress the FF by breaking into the Baxter building to show off his skills and strength. This happened way back when in the original comics. However, in the main continuity reality, they weren't too impressed by his antics and initially denied him entry to the team. In this version of the story, however, Sue Storm feels compelled to give Spidey a chance and help make it work so that he can pay his and Aunt May's bills while also acting as a hero within the team. However, she later becomes jealous when she is left behind on a mission and Spider-Man gets to go, which, I mean, fair enough. Sue's like, hello, I'm here too. In the end, this causes her to run into the arms of Namor, who she then joins, leaving Reed Richards, and with Spider-Man taking her place on the team. Sue is also transformed into an Atlantean by a device Namor created just for this purpose, in case I guess it one day happened that Sue wanted to join him and become an Atlantean, and she can no longer as a result breathe oxygen. I just love how this story ends. I feel like it's kind of random, but it's also kind of great. I just ship Sue and Namor so much, that's the problem here. I'm into it. I'm like, yes, Sue, be Namor's conscience. Rule the underwater kingdom. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it and more what if videos, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, we got a what if playlist, so go click the playlist wherever it is on the screen. I don't know, is it here? Is it somewhere? Click it. Number 8. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Just even saying this title feels weird. This one comes to us from the one-shot What If Infinity Thanos. In this story, Thanos ends up joining and being accepted into the Avengers while they face off with the Builders. He and the team succeeded in defeating their enemy, but at great cost, losing Captain America along the way. In a shocking twist of events, even more shocking than Thanos becoming an Avenger in my opinion, he also ends up taking up Cap's shield after he dies in battle, and almost seems to mourn his loss? It's a weird one, but if you want to see Thanos rub shoulders with Thor and Captain Marvel, then this is definitely the story for you. Number 7. Colonel Bruce Banner. What if Bruce Banner was actually the monster and Hulk was just purely the good guy? Well, that is the question we dive into in issue 91 of the 1989 series. Here, Bruce Banner mistreats his wife, Betty Ross, who eventually becomes, of course, Betty Banner. Bruce is cruel and unkind, but after he is involved in a gamma radiation explosion, another half of him emerges, a glowing green, light-like figure who is gentle and kind and we know as Starman. Basically, this world's Hulk. And he was actually terrified of Bruce himself. Not only is this villain pretty interesting, unique, and strange, but the story is also like epically sad. Despite Betty reaching out for help to both her father and others around her, it seems that no one actually really believes Betty when it comes to the fact that Bruce mistreats her. In the end, she is confined to a mental institution as she's believed to have gone insane. But at least there she appears to be safe from Bruce and his cruelty, so it's like a sad but I guess sort of happy ending. It's bittersweet is what it is. Ugh. Number 6. Mr. Fantastic. So, Mr. Fantastic in this story is still Reed Richards, but he's also Doctor Doom. Let me explain. In issue number 6 of the 1997 What If series, we get to explore an alternate world where the Fantastic Four were granted different powers. These powers seem to have been inspired more by their personality traits. As such, Reed Richards becomes a big brain. Literally, he's just a brain. Instead of him staying as a big disembodied brain though, with mental or psionic capacities, if you will, he ends up being convinced by Dr. Doom to go with him so that Doom might help him by using his knowledge of robotics to build him a humanoid body. You know that when Doom is like, please, let me help you, Reed Richards, that's not what's about to happen. In reality, Doom's plan is to use Reed's powerful brain form to power his time travel machine. The Fantastic Four come to save Reed and a battle ensues, eventually resulting in a massive explosion when Doom attempts to activate his machine. Just as the explosion goes off though, Reed manages to use his mental brain powers to move his mind into Doom's body. As a result, Doom, which I assume moves into Reed's brain form, ends up dead, and Reed lives on, but within the scarred body of Dr. Doom. So now it just looks like Doom is leading the FF. Pretty cool, but also pretty weird. Number 5. Space Admiral Von Strucker. In the What If story from issue number 14 of the 1977 series, we answer the question, what if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? Turns out that events would be, as expected, pretty weird. The whole premise is that on this alternate Earth, humans got to space a lot sooner and ended up being pulled into a conflict where they fought against the Baytans. Strucker himself was an admiral. Strucker would end up on the side of humanity but would ultimately betray humankind and Earth to ally himself with the Baytans. He saw an opportunity for Germany, who he was more loyal to than, just Earth in general, even though, Germany's part of Earth, so I feel like maybe an interesting choice on his part. Basically, he believed that if the Baytans took over as their allies, Germany would be in a better place than they were now, so he decided to betray his fellow space soldiers, which actually I guess kinda does make sense considering everything that happened after World War I. Space wars are always fun and weird though, and this story and its antagonists are, of course, no exception. Number 4. Hypnofish. The Hypnofish that appears in What If issue number 1 from the 1977 series is actually a character that has appeared in the main continuity. A character? A type of fish? Whether there is only a single Hypnofish or more than one. This is a character who has only made a few appearances in even the main continuity since their first 616 appearance in 1963 in Fantastic Four issue number 14. But they also appear as Namor the Submariner's villainous ally in the first What If issue, where we answer the question, what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? The end result is that Namor successfully uses his Hypnofish friend to kidnap Sue Storm, but instead of being rescued as she was in issue number 14 of FF, she ends up staying with Namor and ultimately becoming his queen, all because Spider-Man is on the team, which leaves her kind of feeling like isolated from them. In the end, his Hypnofish and Mentofish plot is successful, and Sue chooses to remain with Namor. Also, yes, there are also Mentofish. That's a thing too. An even more rare thing than Hypnofish, I believe. Number 3. Loki, Prince of Jotunheim. Another one of my favorite episodes from Marvel's and Disney Plus's What If series, for just how lighthearted and adorable it was one that asked the question, what if Thor were an only child? The answer was that Thor would basically be kind of a well-loved brat who is obsessed with partying as opposed to heroics. Not only did we get Party Thor in this episode though, we also got friendly frost giant Loki, who is also known, of course, as the Prince of Jotunheim. Instead of Loki being adopted by Odin and growing up to be the villain we normally know him as, the sort of jealous and vengeful brother of Thor, he becomes Thor's best friend and ally, who also seems to enjoy a good party. And I gotta say, I kinda love it. Super weird and super great. Number 2. Galactus. Galactus is a pretty complex character. Sometimes he's a villain, at times he's been a hero. Currently, I'm pretty sure in the main continuity he's dead and his corpse is maybe being used as part of Thor's throne room, but either way, when it comes down to it, despite being a cosmic inevitability, Galactus often threatens entire worlds with his hunger, which, it feels pretty villainous. And yet even he can end up with a happy ending where he gets to enjoy the simple life. All it takes is for Thanos to use the Infinity Gauntlet to wipe his mind and send him to Earth to live as a human. Hey, it's so easy. In this story, this attempt to neutralize Galactus results in him being recognized, despite his amnesia, as Elvis. This is because Galen in his human form happens to sound and look just like Elvis, coincidentally. When Adam Warlock finds him after defeating Thanos and offers to return Galactus to his prior form and power, he actually refuses and decides to live out his days on Earth with his new partner Gertrude and her son, basically filling in as the planet's, Elvis replacement following the mysterious death of the real Elvis. Which, fair enough. If I came to Earth and then people thought I was Elvis, I'd probably be like, you know what, I think I'm good, I'll just chill here, this is a pretty good life. Number 1. Juggernaut. In this bizarre What If issue, we ask the question, what if Professor X of the X-Men had become the Juggernaut? Which is a strange question and is also a great question. Obviously, instead of his brother Kane Marco. obviously, who is normally the Juggernaut. This story takes place in the pages of issue 13 of the 1989 What If series. Here we see that Professor X is trapped under the rubble of the caved-in tomb where Cyttorak's gem awaited an avatar. So Charles becomes the avatar of Cyttorak and not only gains great physical power, but has his psychic mutant power basically increased as well. Because he was not around to form the X-Men, the Fantastic Four fight against Magneto in their place, which causes anti-mutant hysteria as a result. In response, when Juggernaut surfaces, he creates his own team of mutants to enforce anti-human laws in response. Woo! Becoming a powerful villain as opposed to friend and ally of humankind. Would have gone a lot different.
Starting us off in at number 10, Aquaman. Arthur Curry Aquaman is anything but weak. Anyone familiar with his skill set or any of the feats that he's accomplished over the years will know that to be true. Yet Aquaman has a reputation of being a laughable hero. This is all thanks to a Silver Age portrayal of him that wasn't even in the comics. We're talking about the animated television series Super Friends, where he was depicted as a weak and wholesome superhero in comparison to his Justice League peers. And then there's that seemingly ceaseless joke concerning his communication with aquatic life. In reality, Arthur is an Atlantean demigod hybrid. Whoa. He's the king of Atlantis. Whoa! His aquatic physiology provides him powers likes of superhuman strength, speed, endurance, agility, durability, reflexes and senses, telepathic control of all aquatic life, the ability to speak and understand any language on Earth, underwater adaptation, and in many alternate reality versions of himself, hydrokinesis. All in all, it's tough to argue that Aquaman is a weak character. Maybe weakly written, but definitely not a weak character innately. Moving on to number 9, Black Widow. Compared to our previous number, Black Widow Natasha Romanova is a bit tougher of a character to argue for. She is human, she has no superpowers, and yet she manages to keep up with the best of them. Aside from a little help from tech, Black Widow has proven to be a dangerous foe in most capacities. She has a gifted intellect. Natasha has an uncanny affinity for psychological manipulation, and is able to mask her emotions perfectly. She's an expert tactician, a pro when it comes to hand-to-hand combat and espionage, and an expert marksman along with other weapons. And she's got an enhanced immune system thanks to her exceptional white blood cells. All of that combined makes her incredibly dangerous. But trust us, she probably would want you to underestimate her. It would make the satisfaction of kicking your butt that much sweeter. Moving on to number 8, Cannonball. Cannonball, aka Sam Gerthy, first appeared in Marvel graphic novel issue 4, The New Mutants, in 1982. And while he's probably one of the lesser known characters on our list, he is a force to be reckoned with. The reason why Gerthy is often assumed to be weak is because of his mutant abilities. He can fly at jet speeds while encased in an impenetrable force field. Sure, that's great from a defensive standpoint, but you can imagine why some feel like he's a little useless. On the flip side of that, some would argue that he's one of the most powerful non-Omega level mutants. Since his debut, he has grown in power. His body generates thermochemical energy that releases from his skin, allowing him not only to speed through the air with great maneuverability, but he can manipulate it to have other effects. He can fire this thermochemical energy blast from almost any part of his body, manifested as an impenetrable and virtually indestructible blast field to protect himself from harm. He can extend that shield to protect others, and shape it around them however he chooses. He can use it to imprison others, he can use it to absorb outside kinetic impacts to supply himself with additional energy, and he can increase the power of his blows in combat to create an explosive shock upon impact. I don't know about you, but I would not want to get on this fella's bad side.
Number 7, Jericho vs. Vigilante. Okay, so I did talk about this one for brutal villain defeats, but I had no idea this moment happened before, so if we're talking about brutal DC moments we never saw coming, this one for sure hits the mark for me. Joey Wilson, aka Jericho, is the son of the infamous assassin Deathstroke the Destroyer, but despite that fact, Jericho made almost every effort to be a hero, and he was one. He was even a member of the Teen Titans, the team that consistently stands against his own dad. Now Jericho has the ability, granted to him by the same method that granted his dad his abilities, to transfer his consciousness into the body of another using eye contact and take control of them, effectively possessing them. And it was pretty powerful. He could control some pretty strong beings. Unfortunately, every time he did this, a small shred of the individual psyche remained in his head. At first, it was nothing that he couldn't deal with, just 1 or 2 psyches, but over time, possessing multiple people, he had so many psyches floating through his head that it drove him insane. Now the rogue anti-hero known as Vigilante took on the responsibility of stopping Jericho, and where Vigilante originally planned to just go the quick route and completely end Jericho, Jericho's sister stood firm that her brother was a good person at heart and should not lose his life. Vigilante Vigilante heard her out and decided to not deal with this threat in a lethal way. Instead, after Jericho was captured and in the back of a police vehicle, Vigilante paid the guy a visit and just completely took Jericho's eyes from his head. It eliminated the threat of Jericho's powers, sure, but I can probably think of a dozen different ways that this course of action could have been averted.
Number 6, Joker's payback. Seriously? The Joker? I mean, what is wrong with this guy? Another horrible moment that haunts me. In fact, this whole story haunts me, not just this one moment, which comes from Brian Azzarello's The Joker. This story follows Johnny Frost, who was tasked with going to pick up the Joker after he's been released from prison. Finally out of the clink, Joker returns to check up on some old friends and old businesses. One of his first stops is a bar and business where Harley Quinn has been dancing while he was away. Not appreciating that Harley has gotten involved in this kind of business, Joker decides to take it out on the man running the establishment by skinning him alive, much to Frost's horror. Although, to be honest, this is really only the beginning and things only get much worse from there, especially from Johnny's perspective.
Number 5, Abandoned at the Altar. The wedding of Batman and Catwoman was a big frickin' deal. It was teased at and built up for a long time. Fans were genuinely excited to see it happen and to see what could come next after the fact. A kid of Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne, what would that be like? We've seen futures where they end up together, but sadly, the wedding that was so coveted never came to be. Batman issue 50 came and went, and following suit, so did Catwoman. Came and went from Bruce's life, literally leaving the groom at the altar. Not like permanently leaving his life, but kind of. Batman was marrying Catwoman so he could literally be happy, and after some convincing words from criminals like the Joker and her friend Holly, Catwoman believed that if Bruce Wayne was happy, then Batman couldn't be Batman, which, 1, that's depressing as hell, but 2, both the Joker and Holly, alongside Riddler, Gotham Girl, Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne, Batman, and other villains, were working for Bane, who was manipulating events in order to break Batman emotionally and give rise to the City of Bane event. Well, it certainly sent Batman down a path of absolute despair. He became much more drastic with his fighting of criminals, particularly an innocent Mr. Freeze, and he even donned a less advanced version of his Batsuit so that he would take more of a beating. Like, come on. Guy's been through enough.
Number 4, the non-canonical made canon. One of the weirdest things with DC is how sometimes they just completely leave their stories open to being canon or not, kinda depending on how they're received by fans. And one of the weirdest incidents of this happening is with The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke, written by Alan Moore, was never intended by him to be part of the main continuity. And as far as I know, it kinda isn't really, except for one part of the story, the attack on Barbara Gordon, the pain she suffered, and the result of that attack, her becoming paralyzed from the waist down. Why this was the only thing we chose to keep from this story, I do not know, but the whole idea of it just feels super weird, especially when you consider how brutal and graphic this attack was, where Barbara gets no opportunity to defend herself, having been surprised by the Joker's visit while visiting her dad in her civilian form. This element of the story would change Barbara's life forever, and although I do like Babs as Oracle, and I feel like we're able to actually at least turn it into something good, it feels like she was kind of robbed of, you know, some agency here, especially when you consider the story was never really intended to be incorporated into the canon, and it also still kinda wasn't.
Number 3, Maxwell Lord and Ted Cord. I made a rhyme. I think we can all agree that it's incredibly rare to see a mainline superhero taken out of the picture, and if it does happen, it's usually in a huge blaze of glory, or an incredibly tragic moment, or after a long momentous battle with cancer in the case of Marvel's Mar-Vell. So when Ted Cord was erased from existence thanks to a bullet from a barrel at the hands of Maxwell Lord in the Countdown to Infinite Crisis, it kinda sucked. After following Ted the whole book as he struggles for anyone in the Justice League to take him seriously, while he's correctly on the trail of Maxwell and learning of all his misuse of both the Justice League's files, Batman's Brother Eye satellite, and the OMAX, you'd expect Cord to come out surviving, having a cathartic moment where he finally gets the League's respect or to make a dent in Lord's plans, but instead he gets snuffed out like a tea-light candle that never even begun to make the wax melt. It's abrupt, brutal, and it made me legitimately very sad to read it.
Number 2, Face Off. One of the most brutal moments that still haunts me to this day, of course, involves the Joker. Because of course he's one of the most twisted and often brutal characters that we have over at DC, I would say. This one comes to us from around the time of Death of the Family. In this story, Joker ended up removing his face in order to reinvent himself. Needless to say, this didn't last forever, but it was a terrifying time, and honestly, I'm not sure how Joker lived after doing this, considering that I'm pretty sure he would have been opening himself up to all kinds of nasty infections. Despite removing his face, Joker would later recover and somehow reapply said face, despite the fact that the face was not well stored in between, cause comics, I guess. Ugh.
Number 1, Fridged. This DC Comics brutal moment caused the whole coining of a term and changed the way comic books were written going forward. Green Lantern Kyle Rayner came home one day after doing his superhero thing in Green Lantern issue number 54 from 1994 to find his then girlfriend, photojournalist Alexandra DeWitt, had been very savagely stripped of her life at the hands of the villain known as Major Force. But not only did Major Force take Alexandra's life, but for seemingly no reason, he also stuffed her into the couple's fridge. It was incredibly brutal and served only to give Kyle, the male antagonist of the story, the motivation to reach new heights as a hero, while her character, who was genuinely likable and could stand on her own, was gone forever. This was a trope in not only comics but media in general, that presented viewers and readers with the idea of sacrificing the female love interest for the direct purpose of motivating the male hero, which practically never happened in the reverse. After this comic came out, the trope was finally given a name: fridging, or women in refrigerators, and it changed the way female characters were written in comics for the most part. Going forward.
Number 10, Wolverine loses his skeleton. During 1993's Fatal Attractions crossover event, the X-Men once again had to go up against their old rival, Magneto. The X-Men got the upper hand in this conflict by using the combined psychic powers of Jean Grey and Professor X to cause Magneto to relive all of his worst memories in order to distract him, which is already pretty brutal when you consider that Magneto was a prisoner in German death camps in World War II. Wolverine attacks Magneto and gets a good scratch in, which leads the Master of Magnetism to do one of the most disturbing things imaginable to the fuzzy Canadian. He pulls out Wolverine's metal skeleton, leaving him a twisted heap of adamantium as the X-Men can only look on in horror. It's a brutal moment, but it doesn't really fit the never saw it coming side of this. I mean, he's a guy with metal bones fighting a guy named Magneto. If anything, I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often. Number 9, Sentry vs. Ares. When Norman Osborn set his sights on conquering Asgard, he tricked the god of war Ares into helping him do it. As the battle raged on, Ares discovered that he had been tricked and turned on Osborn, vowing to destroy him. Unfortunately, Norman had the Sentry with him. Worst still, this version of Sentry had given in to the darker urges of his void self. Ares did his best against Sentry, but the fight ended in a truly brutal fashion, with Sentry ripping Ares in half in a shower of gore and entrails. It's a lot, but although you could make the case for it being one of the most graphic Marvel moments, I don't think it checks enough emotional boxes for me to consider it the most brutal by any means. Number 8, Punisher's Steamroller. Frank Castle isn't known for working well with others, but if there's anyone you'd think he'd get along with, it would be Wolverine. They teamed up in Punisher Volume 6, number 17, and it quickly went off the rails, with them being swarmed by a gang of little people who wanted to cut off their legs in order to make them short. In order to get Wolverine into a fit of berserker rage, Frank makes fun of Logan's height, causing Wolverine to go after him. Wolverine calmed down, but Punisher decided that he was slowing him down and blasted Wolvie's legs apart. After taking care of the gang of little people, Frank decides that the best way to keep Wolverine from coming after him is to run him over with a steamroller. Wolverine will obviously heal, so it doesn't have long-term consequences, but it's still a pretty rough move on Frank's part. Number 7, Thanos Rising. Thanos Rising is a mini-series that explores the origins of one of Marvel's most iconic villains, Thanos the Mad Titan. It starts with him as a child, and explores his early courtship with Death, who keeps manipulating him into situations that cause Thanos to kill. At first he is taking out lizards that hurt his friends, but this soon escalates into him capturing classmates in order to dissect them to see what is wrong with him in comparison to others. He insists that all the death is just a means to an end, but eventually admits that he has grown to enjoy it. This solidifies when he decides to capture and dissect his mother so that he can continue to find out why he is different, showing no remorse or care for his actions. It is a brutal origin for the character, and honestly, for a character as twisted as Thanos, nothing else would have sufficed. Number 6. Deadpool kills his parents. Part of the original Sin Comics, Deadpool Volume 5 Issue 34 features a twisted tale from the Merc with the Mouth's past. It takes place in the 90s and is drawn in a style that reflects that. In this story, we see Deadpool in his early days as a brainwashed assassin. His handler decides to test how deeply they have Wade under their control and sends him and Sabretooth to his childhood home with the mission of ending the lives of his own parents. Wade doesn't have much memory of his past and eagerly goes for the house, but he is stopped from attacking his parents. Kevin, you are never gonna guess who stops him. It's 90s Alpha Flight, who I'm honestly surprised haven't crossed paths with Deadpool more often. The two teams fight, and Sabretooth and Deadpool manage to get away, their mission a failure. The jovial tone of the book then takes a sharp turn as Deadpool grabs a drink, returns to his childhood home, and silently takes a tour of the strange and familiar sights before setting the house on fire and getting into the car with Sabretooth without a word. The fact that the book is so lighthearted before this moment makes the final blow so much more brutal. Number 5. Hulk, the end. While I found Punisher, the end, to be kinda bad and immature despite trying really hard to be mature, I really like the Hulk, the end story. In this book, the world has come to an end after a nuclear war, and all of humanity has died off, save Bruce Banner, who is now over 200 years old. He wanders the world by himself, wanting to die, but being unable to, as the Hulk wants to continue being the strongest one there is. The only creatures that have survived are giant mutated swarms of bugs who chase and devour the Hulk, always leaving him a mutilated mess on the ground before leaving him to heal. This continues for years until Bruce realizes that he is the modern Prometheus, who brought fire to the people of Earth from the gods and was punished by being left alone to be consumed by birds. Bruce finally passes, leaving the Hulk to wander the wasteland completely alone for all time. Number 4. Marvel Zombies, Dead Days. In Marvel Zombies, we are shown a world where all of the Earth's heroes have been transformed into flesh-eating zombies who are trying to find more humans to consume to sate their seemingly unending appetite. In the one-shot comic Dead Days, we are shown the last days of the human race, as well as our favorite heroes becoming the cruel monsters we know from Marvel Zombies. There are some brutal and disturbing moments, such as Spider-Man turning and eating Mary Jane. Okay, Kevin will appreciate this. We get to see the zombified Alpha Flight attacking the X-Men after having ate Professor X before they are graphically dispatched by Magneto. We also get to see She-Hulk eating Val and Franklin Richards before having her head blown off by Sue Storm. Every page is more disturbing than the last, but I think the worst part is when Reed Richards decides that zombies are actually the next step in evolution and infects the other Fantastic Four members and then allows them to feed on him and turn him as he smiles. Number 3. Civil War. For anyone only familiar with the movie adaptation of Marvel's Civil War, the reasons behind the Superhero Registration Act are a bit different, and much more awful. The story begins with the superhero team The New Warriors about to raid a home in Stamford, Connecticut, where a group of supervillains are hiding out. The New Warriors were filming a reality show and were being extremely careless when they attacked the villains. The resulting fight led to the villain Nitro and Namorita fighting in front of a school full of children. Nitro then exploded, wiping out the school and the surrounding area. Hundreds of civilians, most of the villains, and most of the heroes all died as a result. It is a rough way to start off the book and really does a good job of setting up the moral quandary at the heart of the story. Number 2. Ruins. You guys were super helpful with recommendations in the comments in part 1, and a lot of the entries on this list are from there, so thank you. One of the ones I wasn't familiar with that a lot of you mentioned was Marvel Ruins, and you were right. It's a rough one. Marvel Ruins is a 2-part mini-series that essentially asks the question of what would the Marvel Universe be if instead of accidents resulting in heroes getting powers, they just got sick and died. For example, in this universe, Matt Murdock saved the old man from getting hit from the truck, and the radioactive goop that got in his eyes caused him to die in the hospital without growing up and becoming Daredevil. Wolverine has a painful bone disease. Captain America introduced Nick Fury to cannibalism at some point. Jean Grey is a teenager selling herself on the street before being killed by Fury, who then takes his own life. Okay, Kevin is gonna be so thrilled. We even get a brief look at Alpha Flight's Aurora and North Star, who are homeless, naked, and starving on the streets. Everything is awful. But my favorite bit comes from issue 2, where it is revealed that when Peter Parker was bitten by the radioactive spider, it gave him a deadly and contagious radiation disease that is spreading among the population. The book is relentless. There's not really much of a story thread other than what if everything sucked? And it answers that question in great and brutal detail. Number 1, the death of the X-Men. The Old Man Logan story takes place on an Earth where the villains finally got organized and teamed up to take over the world, under the command of the Red Skull. The book is filled with disturbing ideas and moments, such as Hulk having an evil gang of Hulk children with his cousin She-Hulk, but the worst in my opinion is how the villains took out the X-Men on the night they came to power. Wolverine was monitoring the situation with Jubilee when the X-Mansion was suddenly attacked by supervillains. As the children fled, Wolverine made a brave final stand against the bad guys, cutting them down one at a time until there were none left. It was then that Mysterio revealed that the whole thing had been an illusion, and Logan had been attacking his own teammates the entire time. I don't think it gets worse than that. Although, I can picture it happening to Adam here at Top 10 Nerd.
At number 10 is Carnage and the Joker. Sounds like absolute chaos. As the Marvel and DC universes converged, the plot unfolded with a certain unnaturalness as Dr. Cassandra Breyer's audacious attempt to pacify these two malevolent menaces using microchips took an ominous turn when Carnage, the symbiote psychopath, effortlessly short-circuited the implant. Meanwhile, the Joker, not to be outdone, suffered a similar fate. This nightmarish duo then embarked on an unaliving spree with their unholy union a brief affair. However, there was a clash between them, driven by differing philosophies on eliminating people, which culminated in an epic showdown with Batman and Spider-Man. You see, Joker was all about having a plan, and Carnage was like, screw that, let's just cause chaos, and apparently, their different philosophies didn't coalesce. Carnage and the Joker's inability to cooperate, while expected, was a fortunate twist, preventing unimaginable catastrophe. I mean, had these two serial unalivers coordinated, countless lives would have been lost to their chaotic malevolence. At number 9 is the Leader and the One Below All. Comic world has witnessed some spine-tingling team-ups, but few saw the nightmarish alliance between the Hulk's arch-nemesis, the Leader, and the malevolent cosmic entity known as the One Below All. The Jade Giant, who's known for smashing his way through the MCU, has transformed into a true horror icon in the comics thanks to the masterful storytelling in Immortal Hulk. Enter the One Below All, which is a sinister, demonic force that Samuel Stearns, the brilliant but deranged leader, willingly submits to. His aim is to obliterate not only the Hulk, but the entire world, morphing it into a grotesque Cronenberg-esque nightmare. The unholy partnership has taken the Hulk's adversaries to a whole new level of terror, creating a chilling narrative that keeps fans on the edge of their seats. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is the Joker and the Violator. Okay, a Carnage and Joker crossover was cool and all, but how about the Joker working with a literal demon clown from Spawn, if you haven't guessed? Violator, an immortal servant of Satan with inhuman strength and fire-breathing abilities, now allies himself with the Joker in a multiverse-shaking partnership. Batman and Spawn, facing the Court of Owls, reluctantly seek Joker's help, only to discover that they've fallen into a trap orchestrated by the Joker and the Violator. The history of the Joker's unholy alliance suggests likely a monstrous transformation later down the road, but betrayal could also be on the horizon. As the two most feared clowns in comics unite, the questions arise about Joker's transformation under the Violator's influence and his ultimate strategy against such a potent source of evil.
Number 7. Alpha Flight vs. Michael Pointer. During the events of M-Day, a mutant named Michael Pointer was taken over by an evil being called the Collective, who used him to destroy an Alaskan town. S.H.I.E.L.D. sent in a couple fighter jets to keep an eye on the situation, but they were promptly destroyed and the Collective made his way into Canada. Now, keep in mind, this is a list of brutal moments for me. So imagine my excitement reading an Avengers issue where my favorite superhero team, Alpha Flight, shows up to try and reason with the villain. Now imagine my horror when the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent's command center suddenly loses contact and the next thing I saw was the entire team's twisted and mangled corpses. These guys had their own 130 issue series for years, so it's not like they're just nobodies, and now they were suddenly just dead. Now I get that not many people like the team as much as I do, so for perspective, imagine if your favorite team was the Fantastic Four, and they were horribly mutilated off-panel. Oh, poor Guardian. That's like the 5th time he's died. I think that what makes this such a brutal moment for me, beyond my personal attachment to the characters, is that it is so quick and off-panel, leaving us to imagine what horrible things were done to leave such a terrified-looking gory mess of Canada's super team. Number 6. Rick Jones's fate worse than death. Immortal Hulk is a cosmic horror series with plenty of brutal moments, with characters constantly getting eviscerated and transformed into creatures that are pure nightmare fuel. You could make the case for Banner, Absorbing Man, or any of the Hulks earning this spot, but no one quite got as brutal a fate as Hulk's old friend Rick Jones. When the Shadow Base wanted to go after the Hulk, they combined the deceased Rick's body with that of the Abomination, causing Rick to transform into a bizarre and terrifying creature with 2 of Rick's faces and hands growing out of his head, which would vomit acid at the Hulk while Rick begged for help. He was eventually removed from this abomination, but a few issues later, he was once again fused with a gamma mutate, this time Del Fry, leaving Rick a twisted co-joined mess with Rick's screaming head being the arm of a glowing green skeleton creature. Number 5. Carnage USA. One of Spider-Man's most brutal and sadistic villains is Carnage. He is a serial murderer named Cletus Cassidy, who bonded with a symbiote and became an even more dangerous and twisted villain. He has had a lot of brutal moments over the years, such as his actions in Maximum Carnage and Deadpool vs. Carnage, but my preference is for the miniseries Carnage USA. In this story, Carnage goes to a small town and sneaks into a meatpacking plant in order to eat an entire herd of cattle so that he can get strong enough to take over the town. He sends the symbiote in through the water pipes and takes over men, women, and children, forcing them to attack each other and holding a few of them hostage for and amusement. There are some brutal Cletus moments, such as sending a woman out to collect her husband's head in order to secure the safety of her children, but my favorite and most twisted is when he gathers all of the survivors in a church, hands out a bunch of pliers, and demands they pull out their own teeth in exchange for his mercy. Number 4. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe again. In Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, Deadpool became aware of his status as a fictional character and lost his mind, going on a brutal kill streak that resulted in all the Marvel heroes and villains getting dispatched in cruel and unusual ways. A few years later, in the sequel, we got to see a Deadpool from another world do the same thing. On this Earth, Deadpool is put under mind control by the villains of the Marvel Universe and tricked into going after his friends. What makes it even more disturbing than the first for me was the fact that while he's attacking the heroes, he is living a fantasy in his head that makes him think that he is going on lighthearted adventures with his friends. This is especially true of his encounter with Spider-Man while bonded with the Venom symbiote. In his mind, Deadpool and Spidey are entered into a pie-eating contest against the Blob in order to win money for charity. In reality, he's actually feasting on Spider-Man's brains. It's more brutal due to the lack of agency he's given in his story and the devastating consequences that it holds. Number 3. The Ultimatum Wave. The Marvel Ultimate Universe universe was a wild ride. It gave us Miles Morales, as well as the romance between Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, so it makes sense that they would also give us some of the most bizarre and extreme Marvel stories. In Ultimatum, Magneto has been driven mad at the loss of his children and decides that rather than destroying humanity to make the world safe for mutants, he's just gonna kill everyone. He uses a doomsday device and his powers to shift the world off of its axis, causing natural disasters all over the globe. Much of Europe, including all of Latveria, is frozen under a layer of ice, and New York is hit by a massive tidal wave. Millions of people all over the world die in the attack, including Nightcrawler and Hank McCoy. Magneto then sends out more of his minions to destroy the heroes, causing the brutal deaths of several more heroes, including Hank Pym, Doctor Strange, and Thor, just to name a few. Professor X gets personally murdered by Magneto, who later has his face blasted off by Cyclops, who then gets assassinated at an anti-mutant rally. It is a relentless story, but I think the most brutal moment is when Pym finds his wife Janet being eaten by the Blob and responds by entering his giant form, picking up the Blob, and biting his head off. Number 2, Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies is pretty self-explanatory. It takes place on an alternate Earth where the heroes of the Marvel Universe have been infected with a zombie virus. They retain much of their intelligence and personality, but they are so consumed with hunger that they are willing to go to any lengths to get to their next meal. There is something so brutal about watching all of your favorite heroes hunt down Magneto and brutally and graphically eat him in the opening pages, and it only gets more disturbing from there. I'd say that the most brutal moment in this story is the revelation that Hank Pym has been keeping T'Challa sedated but alive in a lab, and he has been removing his limbs one by one to eat. It's a brutal and disgusting story that you can't help but have fun reading. Number 1, Spider-Man's take on September 11th. There are way more gory and graphic Marvel moments on this list, but the fact that this comic features the real-life tragedy of September 11th, 2001 makes it hard to justify putting it lower on the list. Like, I can't sit here and say that a fictional tidal wave was worse than this. Anyways, this issue of Amazing Spider-Man was released a month after the tragedy and opens with Spider-Man surveying the devastation as civilians ask him why he didn't stop the attack. The book is kind of a mixed bag with the benefit of hindsight, with devastating moments like a little boy lost in the rubble looking for his dad, but also features moments like Doctor Doom crying at the sight of the devastation, as if he hasn't tried to do this exact same thing multiple times. I have mixed feelings about whether this book should have been made so soon after the real life events, but wherever you land, it's hard not to describe the events depicted as
Number 10, Joe Fixit and Red She-Hulk/Red Harpy. For a book that's about a giant green monster that's potentially a vessel for the opposite to God that preys on the nightmares and rage of mankind, Immortal Hulk has a lot of heartfelt moments. Betty Ross and Bruce Banner's relationship is complex. They were so good together at first, but obviously the Hulk makes things complicated, and Bruce has a lot of childhood stuff and daddy issues to get through, like a metric butt ton. Eventually, Betty passed away, but she came back and became the Red She-Hulk, and then she fused that persona with that of her Harpy persona that she has become a few times, so that she was the Red Harpy Hulk thing. Well, essentially, in Immortal Hulk issue 48, while Hulk was Joe Fixit, he and Betty as the Red Harpy got it on. She talked about how closed off Bruce is to her compared to the Joe Fixit persona, and even other personas of the Hulk. It's just so weird to me, and it almost feels like this is Betty cheating on Bruce, but it's really just two aspects of Betty and Bruce hooking up together. I don't know if it's cheating or not, but it's certainly strange.
Number 9, Miss Marvel and Vision. Captain Marvel and Vision are definitely a couple of the weirdest ones on this list. And we also happen to just be starting out, so it's not a good sign. Back in the day, Carol was not yet known as Captain Marvel and instead went by the name of Miss Marvel. This was before Kamala Khan came along and took up that mantle for herself after Carol had moved on from it, becoming Captain Marvel. Kamala inherited it, by the way, because she was just a massive Carol Danvers fangirl, which I kinda love. Before those days, however, there was the awkward date that happened between Carol as Miss Marvel and Vision. This was after Vision and Scarlet Witch had broken up, and I gotta say, I don't know who takes the cake for having more awkward dates between them, but in a weird way, it kind of makes sense that they'd get together and have an awkward date, considering that when I think of awkward superhero dates in Marvel Comics, both of these people come to mind for me for like folks who have had some of the most awkward date moments.
Number 8, Nightwing. This one is a little unique, not only because it breaks up a long-beloved relationship between Nightwing and his Teen Titans teammate Starfire, but also because the writers of the comics retcon things about multiple characters' histories that made no sense or kind of completely ruined the integrity of said characters. After deciding that Barbara Gordon is the perfect fit for Nightwing over Starfire, the beginning pages of Nightwing Annual Number 2 in 2007 gave us Nightwing confessing how absolutely madly in love he is with Barbara. The story then goes on to retcon their entire history, stating that they had been in love since the days when they were Batgirl and Robin, despite the weird age difference. And then, if that weren't weird enough, the book turns Dick Grayson into a cheater. Dick shows up the night before he's supposed to marry Starfire and spends the night with Babs. So he cheats on Corey, but then Dick also gives Babs an invitation to that wedding after just spending the night together, and she wasn't even aware that Dick was still planning to get married in the first place. Weird.
At number 7 are the Marvel Zombies. In the twisted Marvel Zombies universe, where heroes hunger for the flesh of the living, an unexpected and mind-boggling team unfolded. You see, Galactus, the cosmic devourer of worlds, was rendered into a grotesque figure, a far cry from his formidable 616 incarnation. You see, in this nightmarish reality, Galactus manifested as a corporeal being which is vulnerable to the insatiable appetites of the zombie Avengers. It's kind of weird because these undead mortals eventually feast upon a cosmic entity known for its indomitable might. While it's explained that the Galactus of Earth 2149 was crafted from flesh, a startling departure from what we're used to. Because as he's depicted in 616, Galactus' true form isn't a physical body, but rather abstract energy. The big dude in a funny suit we see is just what our minds can comprehend, like how Pennywise is actually a cosmic spider. So anyway, Mark Miller's zombie series introduced this shocking image of the zombies eating Galactus, leaving subsequent writers little choice but follow suit. As the zombie Avengers devoured Galactus, they unwittingly inherited his purpose, setting off a multiversal buffet until the cosmic meal dwindled and the cosmic power ran out, returning them to their ravenous roots. At number 6 are the Secret Six, a team once heralded as heroes back in the 60s, but slowly became an unexpected amalgamation of villainy that took the comic world by surprise. Unlike your run-of-the-mill baddie alliances, this group incorporated a diverse roster with Deadshot, Bane, and Harley Quinn, and even the notorious Joker claiming membership. But what's truly shocking is the mysterious puppeteer known as Mockingbird. It's like discovering that Batman has been secretly pulling the strings for the Joker all along. The revelation that the Riddler or Lex Luthor also had their hands in the mix is sort of like unearthing the Pandora's box of villainy. These unexpected team-ups redefine the very essence of villainy and heroism, demonstrating that in the realm of comics, the line between good and evil can blur in the most spine-chilling ways. Speaking of which, at number 5 is Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers. Spider-Man's most terrifying villain is allowed to form his own Avengers? Now that's scary. Following the Skrull invasion, Osborn seized control of S.H.I.E.L.D., manipulating them in the Thunderbolt to create his own sinister version of the Avengers under the guise of the Hammer Agency. What makes this alliance truly spine-chilling is the unsettling cast of heroes, quote-unquote, that Osborn assembled. Bullseye is posed as Hawkeye, Venom as Spider-Man, and Moonstone as Miss Marvel, each of them concealing their secretly malevolent intentions. Ares and Sentry, once heroes, found themselves tainted by their affiliation with Osborn's dark agenda. Yet, the most disturbing transformation lay in Daken, who assumed the mantle of Wolverine, and Noh-Varr, who became Captain Marvel. Norman himself adopted the Iron Patriot suit, twisting patriotism into something nightmarish. At number 4 is Magneto and Red Skull. In the convoluted tapestry of comic book alliances, the pairing of Red Skull and Magneto is nothing short of a paradoxical enigma. Two diametrically opposed figures, their shared history is a testament to the complexity in the Marvel Universe. Their initial encounter during the Acts of Vengeance storyline was marked by Magneto's seething contempt for the embodiment of the evil that Red Skull represents. This animosity is well-founded, considering Magneto's harrowing experiences during the event from World War II, which shall not be named. Yet, Yet, as the narrative threats of Marvel Comics tend to weave, we find Magneto standing shoulder to shoulder with the very antagonist he once despised. In Deadpool Eliminates the Marvel Universe Again, and in Old Man Logan, these universes both witnessed Magneto's unsettling alliance with Red Skull as they collaborated to further their nefarious ambition. This unlikely partnership serves as a testament to the ever-shifting alliances and allegiances and the moral ambiguities that define the Marvel Universe, where heroes and villains dance on a precarious tightrope of alliances and rivalry. At number 3, the Crime Master and Toxin. Let's take a look at the shocking collaboration between Flash Thompson, known as Agent Venom, and the notorious Crime Master during the Agent Venom storyline. See, at first glance, it seemed like an ordinary showdown between hero and villain, but beneath the surface, a sinister plot was unfolding. The Crime Master, the ever-cunning mastermind, developed a plan that transcended mere villainy. See, he coerced Eddie Brock, the former Venom, into joining his malevolent cause. However, his ambition didn't stop there. Using the formidable symbiote Toxin, the Crime Master forcibly merged it with Eddie, creating an unholy alliance. Together with the villains, they embarked on a campaign of terror, targeting not just Agent Venom, but also his loved one, revealing a level of malevolence that left readers in complete shock. At number 2 is Judge Joker. Now, the scariest villain team-ups often emerge when you least expect them, like when the Joker, infamous for his lack of superpowers, ventured beyond his universe. In the Batman/Judge Dredd's, Joker wields unimaginable powers after crossing into Judge Dredd's realm via a multiversal teleportation belt. He aids Judge Unalive, a malevolent entity seeking to annihilate all life across the multiverse. In return, Judge Unalive imparts sinister abilities upon Joker, transforming him into another dark judge. Joker's newfound power allows him to make heads explode with his laughter, a grotesque and quite fitting ability. Each dark judge gains powers tied to their obsessions, making Joker's lethal laughter a darkly logical choice. He becomes immortal in this form, impervious to harm. However, the Joker's return to his original self is a twist in itself. See, if he had retained these abilities, he'd be unstoppable amidst even DC's mightiest heroes. While it's disappointing for the Clown Prince of Crime, his cinematic presence would dwindle with these R-rated powers, a reminder that sometimes unexpected alliances lead to frankly horrifying outcomes. And at number 1 is the Injustice League. The Injustice League, a formidable gathering of DC's most notorious evildoers, is typically led by the brilliant Lex Luthor, featuring iconic antagonists like the Joker, Deathstroke, Black Manta, Cheetah, and Sinestro. The Injustice League is a force to be reckoned with. However, their effectiveness as a team pales in comparison to their individual endeavors, primarily due to the Justice League's seamless teamwork. Interestingly, for those seeking the Legion of Doom, think of it as a rebranding of the Injustice League. The Super Friends are essentially mirrored in the Justice League, sharing many members and embodying similar dynamics. And so much of what applies to the Injustice League also holds true for the Legion of Doom as well. That's 2-in-1 for you.
Number 10, Dr. Murrow. The interesting thing too about Dr. Murrow is that some spelling for this character is like Dr. Morrow, but if you actually look at the comic itself, it's Murrow with a U, so I believe it's Murrow with a U, but if you say Morrow and I say Murrow, that's also fine. I'm not gonna come for you. Dr. Murrow appears in the What If issue number 11 from the 1997 series. Here we answer the question, what if the Marvel bullpen had been transformed into the Fantastic Four? Being from a different time period, there are definitely some extremely sexist tones in this issue. A lot of it aimed sadly at fabulous Flo Steinberg, who stands in for Invisible Woman. But another ridiculous aspect of this issue, aside from that more serious one, are some of the villains that we see the bullpen version of the FF face off against. Like their first villain, Dr. Murrow. Dr. Murrow's island was the one that they planned on visiting before they were delivered some fan mail. Upon opening it up, they found a mysterious radio-like device which transformed them into the Fantastic Four, granting them powers after they were exposed to cosmic rays that the device emitted. Turns out that this was all part of a Skrull plot, which we find out later in the issue, and that Dr. Murrow was also a victim of a similar device. Oh no! But even with that, why did he attack them when they got to his island? Why is he a villain in all this? Why is he one of the first villains we run into? Did the transformation like make him, I don't know, just really mad or something? Or violent? The reality is they probably just wanted to start the issue off with a good fight and a bit of mystery, but still, Murrow ends up being a pretty bizarre villain because of this. because there's things that just aren't explained here. Oh well, I'm willing to come along for this strange ride in any what if. Number 9. Disappointed Loki. In the What If story, What If the Hulk Had the Brain of Bruce Banner, we get to see what would happen if the Hulk had kept Banner's wits and then ran into Loki's illusion, you know, with the train tracks and such. Turns out this version of the Hulk was too smart to fall for Loki's trap. Seeing the TNT on the train tracks, but believing it to be an illusion, meant that he would never be put onto a collision course with the Avengers and therefore would never join that team. Instead, Loki ends up disappointed, and Banner goes on to fight against Galactus, joining with Professor X and Reed Richards to create the new and extremely powerful uni-being of X-Man. Poor Loki though, he's like, but I set this trap in. Alright. I guess not all traps are winners. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show some support for us on other platforms, head on over to Facebook, give us a like, give us a follow, it does help us out, and we're gonna have lots of exciting new content coming for you over there. Exciting. Number 8. Fake Captain America. Both weird and great in a lot of ways. Fake Captain America was William Burnside. Now, while William Burnside does exist in the 616 universe, where he was a well-meaning Captain America imposter driven mad by improper use of the super soldier serum, in the What If reality of Earth 84444, he ended up becoming obsessed with communists, paranoid that they could be lurking around every corner, which is kind of what happened in the main continuity, but in this one, he's less like, oh no, it's just the super soldier serum, and more like he made some conscious choices here. Modeling America into less of a democracy under the name of Captain America, Burnside would be beaten back by the real Captain America, who in this story doesn't resurface until 1984, which means that Burnside has a lot of time to basically do harm to the American image and the influence of the nation's people. This warning story and the speech the real Cap gives at the end are both still pretty relevant today, which is why this is like a great issue, but also why it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how there's a lot of stuff in this that I feel like is still relevant, even though it's from 1984. Do we ever do new things, or does history just cycle in like some vicious loop? Probably that. Number 7. Maggie Nito. Maggie Nito appears in a humor issue of What If. She's the one who terrorizes poor old styrofoam skeleton Wolverine. She's technically supposed to be the female child version of Magneto, who is known in the comics for ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine over the course of a few horrifying panels of comics. Maggie Nito, on the other hand, doesn't need any powers to hurt her version of Wolverine, who is much more cowardly in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. Which, I mean, makes sense, considering he literally has a styrofoam skeleton. I mean, I would be afraid of Maggie Nito too, if I had a styrofoam skeleton. Also, just in general, she seems like a mean little girl.
Danger. This villain is definitely a weird one. It's basically just the humanoid form of the Danger Room, a highly sophisticated computer interface that the X-Men used to train. But in 2009's Astonishing X-Men number 9, the Danger Room comes to life and takes on a humanoid form that calls itself Danger. Although I know this isn't a What If issue, in 2010's What If Astonishing X-Men number 1, Danger gets a more focused storyline, and it's even weirder than you might expect. Basically, Ultron somehow catches wind that Danger has come to life and falls in love with her. They become a couple and go on a murder spree, killing all the X-Men and then eventually Professor X himself. Then they take to the cosmos and continue to kill all the organic life forms in their path, until they finally establish their own intergalactic empire. It's later pondered by the Watcher that if Professor X had only listened to Danger when she declared that she had gained sentience, she wouldn't have been so inclined to take him down. It's sort of a cool message about the dangers of AI, but first and foremost, it's just a weird antagonist in this What If issue. The Danger Room gets married to Ultron. It doesn't get much weirder than that, I don't think.
Number 5. Thanos. Another one of my favorites has to come from the What If Disney Plus streaming show, where we actually got to see what Thanos would be like if he were on the side of good. So technically here, I guess he's a hero, but of course in the main continuity we know him better as a villain, both in the comics and the MCU, so yeah. Thanos ends up joining the Ravagers and becoming a close ally of Star-Lord in episode 2 of the show, where we get to explore what the world would be like if T'Challa, instead of Peter Quill, ended up as Star-Lord. And guess what? Turns out the world would potentially be a lot better for it. Minus the imminent doom of the universe as a result of Ego's plot to kind of like take it over, but ignoring that. Other than that, it was doing pretty well for itself, I gotta say. Thanos didn't even snap half the universe out of existence in this reality, and all because T'Challa convinced him not to do so by simply talking him down. Man, where was Black Panther when that was happening before? Why didn't he just come in and be like, hey, look, Thanos, no. Maybe he's got to travel in space before he can have those conversational skills. Maybe that's why.
At number 4 is Cable. So in this 2-part What If issue, Cable is the bad guy and he actually kills his parents, Cyclops and Jean Grey, as well as Professor X. Professor X seems to be getting a lot of heat on this list. And even though this is a what if and basically anything goes, it's just a really bizarre call to have part of the X-Men family travel through time to kill his parents and their noble mentor Charles Xavier. This naturally doesn't go unnoticed and actually starts an all-out war between the X-Men and the X-Force. And while these two groups are duking it out, Magneto takes the opportunity to take control of Washington, D.C., which segues into that second part I mentioned, aptly named What If Magneto Took Over the USA. But regardless, this just made me feel weird to see a character we're used to seeing as a hero just take a sudden turn to evil, so much to the point where he kills his own flesh and blood in a brutal massacre. And why? Well, they have some differences in ideology, but why does that matter if they're in the past? Couldn't Cable have just stayed in his own time and believed in stuff over there? Although he's not really known to stay in his own time very often. It's just that he normally does it for good instead of doing it to start a massive war that ends in Sentinels dropping nukes on Washington and killing everyone. I don't know, was it worth it, Cable? Check out the issue and see if you think.
Number 3, Elektra. Elektra makes an appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34. This being a humor issue, we get to take a look at what might have happened had Elektra survived her run-in with Bullseye. Even though Elektra at this time was depicted as a villain, or, you know, at least an extremely edgy anti-hero, it seems that this one-panel take on the character has her reconsider her life of crime as a result of her near-death experience. This is pretty weird, considering I'm pretty sure at this point Elektra would have had already a few near-death experiences in her line of work as an assassin. So, like, unless she knew she was going to die here and then that's not what happened. But I feel like for her this is just an average Tuesday. Elektra even goes so far as to consider settling down and getting married. And, I quote, or something. What is or something? Also, Elektra getting married just because she didn't die from Bullseye fighting her? Wow, that just seems a little unbelievable. Anything can happen in an alternate reality.
Number 2 is Dazzler. In What If number 33, the question is asked, what if Dazzler had become the Herald of Galactus? These days, Dazzler is known to be a relatively stagnant member of the X-Men and doesn't usually get a lot of mention in the mainstream. Sorry, Amanda. Amanda really likes Dazzler. However, in the 80s, it was a totally different story. Right before this issue of What If in 1981, Dazzler is taken on by Galactus as his herald, but only to complete a quick mission to retrieve his original herald. Then she goes back home. But fast forward 1 year later to 1982, and in this What If, the situation is revisited again, but in this case, she stays as his herald and actually becomes one of the most powerful villains in all the cosmos. The Herald of Galactus is an individual imbued with part of Galactus' power cosmic, and their job is to fly around the cosmos and look for planets for Galactus to consume. So it's a pretty big deal to be given the title of Herald, both for the one who's selected and for the people of the cosmos, because if you're doing your job right as a herald, you'd best believe you're ruining and ending the lives of countless others. So, for Dazzler, of all the heroes to be taken in by Galactus and given this responsibility, it just leaves me with a weird feeling in my gut. Like, why would a character that barely wants to be a hero and only really wants to sing, like why would they take on the job of Herald of Galactus? The answer does lie in this issue, but it's still a bit confusing and maybe a bit out of character for Dazzler, which is why I put it at number 2.
Number 1, Susie Richards. In issue number 30 of the 1989 What If series, Susie, Reed and Sue's second child, becomes the villain. Susie is obviously meant to be a stand-in for Valeria Richards, who we have now, their daughter, who has a weird history where she was kind of both the oldest and then like the youngest child of the fantastic duo. It's confusing, but don't worry about it. In this version of the story, she is most definitely just the younger, but despite being the younger sibling between her and Franklin, she still terrifies her brother, who in the main continuity was once known for insanely powerful reality warping abilities. Although I don't think he has those in this reality. But anyways, you know you're scary when you're scaring Franklin. Even a young Franklin. Susie is an evil little girl who it turns out was possessed by a hellspawn that came from the negative zone. In the end, Franklin is forced to fight and defeat her, but unfortunately all too late, as the rest of his family has already been killed by her. Even Dr. Doom doesn't stand a chance against the possessed Susie. Poor Franklin, he warned everyone, but they didn't listen.
Number 10. T'Challa Star-Lord. Have you ever seen the MCU's What If animated series? It is honestly really fun, and it has a great art style as well. But just like in the comics, it's the fun, possible scenarios of what if that are the star. One of the better, if not weirder, episodes revolves around a universe where instead of Peter Quill, it was Prince T'Challa of Wakanda who was abducted by the Ravagers all the way back in the day. T'Challa, as the new Star-Lord, convinced the Ravagers to become a Robin Hood-like group who steal from the rich and give to the less fortunate. Under his leadership, they became icons and they saved a lot of people, recruited and persuaded lots of heroes and villains to join the Ravagers, one of which even being Thanos. T'Challa heard of the orb on Morag, the one from the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy, and he goes to retrieve it, being stopped by Korath the Pursuer, just like Peter was. But unlike Peter though, Korath actually recognized T'Challa as Star-Lord and he joined up as well. He saved Peter Quill from Ego, saved Drax's family, got Nebula and Thanos to reconnect, and even stole a device from the Collector that could terraform ecosystems and save entire planets from starvation caused by overpopulation. That thing Thanos was trying to fix in the Avengers movies. He eventually joins the Guardians of the Multiverse to fight the insanely powered Ultron. It's pretty great. Number 9. Miles Morales becomes Wolverine. In this What If, we don't really get an explanation as to why, but instead of being his normal self, Miles Morales in this world is instead a mutant with the same abilities as Wolverine, and when he is younger, he is abducted alongside other children by Weapon X, who turn him into the adamantium skeleton super weapon just like the alternate Wolverine, because of course that's what happens. Fast forward a few years though. Now in this world, Sentinels are being used to hunt down mutants by S.H.I.E.L.D. And after Miles takes out like 3 of them, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends this super cool looking warrior wielding an adamantium katana to take him out. This awesome S.H.I.E.L.D. warrior turns out to be Miles' father, and once he discovers this Wolverine mutant is his son, he turns on S.H.I.E.L.D. So, obviously they send another assassin, Miles' uncle Aaron, who seems to be doomed to be bad no matter what because, you know, that's just how it goes. He is this world's version of Sabretooth. Miles' father defends his son to his dying breath until Miles jumps in to beat Sabretooth to a pulp and almost ends him too before his father convinces him to stop and to instead be a hero. And then the X-Men show up to recruit Miles, led by a professor who is Genki Lee, the original Miles' best friend for some reason. Yeah, I don't know, but this story is wild. You should check it out. Number 8. Wolverunisher. On the topic of Wolverine, what about the What If where Wolverine became a kind of Punisher? In this story, we were in 1920s Canada, following a Wolverine who doesn't seem to actually have claws, or if he does, he barely uses them. He does seem to have his healing factor and senses though. Whatever his powers are, he is still himself because we find out he has had a son with a lady who works at a bar. He is forced to take responsibility for them and makes friends with the barkeep, but that all comes to an end when they are all brought to an end thanks to a fire caused by a man named Scarface, who fled to Chicago. Obviously, Logan isn't going to let that go. He tracks down the villain and with the help of one Matteo Deprigia, and all while wearing a skull and crossbones flag on his chest and wielding firearms and basically never popping his claws, he actually takes his revenge on Scarface, and it's great. I mean, he looks totally amazing in this story, but it's also an incredibly weird twist on a version of Punisher and a version of Wolverine. Also, it's a little more disappointing than I expected it to be.
Number 7. What if you were Spider-Man? This is one of those very short stories that is summed up within basically a page, or in this case, 2 pages. 2 panels. Here, the what if question posed is what if you, yourself, were Spider-Man? I mean, if I were Spider-Man, I would probably carry my partner a little more securely while swinging around town, and I'd try to be a little kinder to myself when it came to all the self-guilt and blame that we usually see Spider-Man feeling over all of his failings. I'd definitely be doing weekly therapy sessions if I were Spider-Man. But don't think too hard about what you do differently or the same as Peter Parker, because the end to this what if is pretty hilarious and dark all at once. Because you are then greeted with a panel featuring a tombstone that says, "Here lies Spider-Man," where there is also a little space for you to fill in your name, and a bunch of villains surrounding it. Because of course, none of us average Joes could make it as Spidey. Har har. But also, it's probably true. I don't think I could actually make it as Spidey. Although we would have powers, right? I guess if we didn't have powers, we'd really be screwed though. Number 6. What if Helen Taylor had become Nova? This story takes place in the pages of issue 15 from Marvel's first What If volume, beginning in 1977. Here we get a few stories involving alternate characters taking up the mantle of Nova. One such character is a woman named Helen Taylor, who is basically a random civilian, redhead, and a wife. Or should I say, a widow? She gets the power of Nova just after her husband is murdered in the streets in front of her after a mugging gone wrong. Helen swears to use her newfound power to get revenge, believing the powers are kind of an answer to her plea for some way to extract vengeance on the murderer, who we know as Willie DeBrow, or Willie DeBro, depending on how you want to say that. Nova sets off shaking down every criminal joint she can find in the city and making quick work of the Kingpin along her way to boot. The Fantastic Four manage to stop her and capture her to find out exactly what her powers are and where they came from and sort of why she's doing all this. And while this is going on, we learn that months ago, Willie perished in a car accident and has been dead ever since. What a twist. And if you're like, months ago, does that make sense? Yes, this story takes place over the course of months. I actually went back to look for that because I was like, that's so crazy, it's such a long period of time. A long period of time and only a few pages. Number 5. What if Ben Parker's nephew was Galactus? I love this story. This is a humorous what if story included in issue 3 of volume 2 of the What If series. In this story, we find out what would have happened if Uncle Ben's nephew was Galactus instead of Peter. Galactus arrives home to find out that his Uncle Ben has been murdered, but he refuses to accept this, mourning the death of his uncle, who gave him his very first microscope. Oh no. With a mere thought, he vaporizes his uncle's murderer, reducing him to protoplasmic slime. Then he uses the power cosmic to restore his uncle to full health, even giving him powers and turning him into a Silver Surfer version of himself. Silver Uncle Ben? The story has a happy ending with Aunt May satiating her nephew's hunger with a very hefty helping of wheat cakes. Oh, it's so great. It's so wholesome. Number 4. What if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Or more specifically, what if Wolverine had fallen through a portal and ended up in the age of Conan the Barbarian and then lived on there? Yeah. This is what happens here, and of course, because this is what this story was always meant to be about, Wolverine and Conan end up going head to head, because we all know this is really a what if Wolverine and Conan fought each other story. In the end, Wolverine falls for Red Sonja because redheads, and Conan also ends up falling for Jean because redheads, after he falls back through a portal that sends him to Wolverine's time by accident. All in all, Conan ends up getting pretty messed up here, losing his hand, and then when he does return to Wolverine's time, without Logan's presence, Jean ends up going full Dark Phoenix and basically destroys the universe. Meanwhile, it's a happy ending for Wolverine, who stays in Conan's age and ends up with Red Sonja. What a strange but fantastic adventure. You can check this one out in issue 16 of the second What If volume, starting in 1989. Number 3. What if Spider-Man married Black Widow? This one is another one-panel story brought to us in volume 1's jam-packed humor issue, issue 34. Here we see a one-panel story that answers the question, what if Black Widow and Spider-Man ended up getting married? This is also just a strange question to pose, as these two, well, they don't have a ton of interaction in the comics, and they've never really been known to have any kind of long-lasting romance that could potentially lead to wedding bells. However, there could be a reason for that, it turns out. The what if uses a bit of wordplay for this scenario, implying that because Natasha is a Black Widow, she would end up eating Spider-Man. After all, that is what Black Widows try to do, in nature that is. I don't know if Black Widow could actually catch Spider-Man in the comics. I feel like he might be a little too fast, and he's also got a spidey sense, but whatever, it's just a fun what if story, so taking it way too seriously. Number 2. What if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? In this what if, we get to imagine what it would be like if the original Marvel bullpen had become the FF in real life, each being given their own superpowers matching the actual Fantastic Four team. Stan Lee, as such, becomes Mr. Fantastic, Flo Steinberg becomes Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl as she was still known then, Sol Brodsky becomes the Human Torch, and Jack Kirby becomes the ever-loving Thing. The story is crazy over the top, and it doesn't seem to paint any of them in too kind of a light, to be honest, with the staff being transformed by a mysterious device delivered to the office, sent courtesy of the S people. But who are the S people? They end up becoming even more famous than their comic book counterparts, the original Fantastic Four, and eventually ask Prince Namor for help. They don't get turned back into their normal selves, but they do uncover the mystery of who the S people are. Any guesses? S, it turns out, stands for Skrull. Surprise. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that because I was like, what starts with an S? And for some reason, Skrull did not come to my mind. Not reading a lot of Skrull stuff lately, obviously. Number 1. What if you were the Red Skull? I get the idea of what if you were Spider-Man, but what if you were the Red Skull? I mean, out of all the villains to pick, that is certainly a weird one to include here, Marvel. I did not see that coming. This story is also featured in issue 34 of the 1989 volume of What If, right under Spider-Man. Now, I see what they were trying to do, give you the option of a what if you were a hero or what if you were a villain, because, you know, that seems kind of fair. But I mean, given Red Skull's history, it just seems like a weird one to include when you could have picked, I don't know, a bunch of any other villains that exist that people might want to be more. Like, what about Doctor Doom or Green Goblin, which would make sense with Spidey, or even sometimes villain, sometimes hero, all-time thief, Black Cat. I mean, I would want to be Black Cat. Wouldn't you want to be Black Cat? She's so cool.
At number 10, we have Benjamin Grimm with dragon wings. In What If number 6, the question is posed, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? And the answer is that things get very weird. Basically, instead of taking the form of the Thing, Benjamin Grimm's powers are reduced, or ameliorated, I guess, to basically just 2 giant dragon wings on his back. He decides that he wants to be known by citizens as Dragonfly, which just proves that as long as you've got powers, people are gonna celebrate you no matter what. Someone even feels his wing and says, "Hey, I'm touching his wing," and it's kinda cold, which is bizarre to me because it adds that little extra bit of detail that I don't think I needed while reading this one. The other heroes get their own makeovers as well, and I'm covering another one later on in this list, but just seeing a shirtless Ben Grimm flying around with purple scaly wings made me think, well, I just needed to put him on the list. At number 9, we have Medieval Iron Man. In this What If, the question is asked, what if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? So, Iron Man is basically the same as he's always been, except what I find super weird in this issue is that he so brutally outmatches everyone in the medieval era, but doesn't hold back at all. I mean, just on the cover, you see him blasting his futuristic energy blast into a crowd of helpless soldiers as they're screaming for their lives. I don't know what gets into Iron Man in this issue that makes him think that he's in any moral position to be dropping into the medieval times and dominating the combat game, but that's just how this one plays out, and honestly, it's great. It's a weird portrayal of Iron Man given the context of the story, but it's honestly a pretty cool what if that I recommend checking out. At number 8 is The Watcher as a stand-up comedian. I know he's not really a superhero, but I'd argue that he's more good than bad, and he's surely got powers, so he's on the list. In this one, The Watcher asks a bunch of different what if questions, one being, haven't you always wondered what would happen if The Watcher was a stand-up comedian? Not really, but okay, let's see what he's got. Basically, this issue delves into some pretty bizarre artwork and poses a bunch of different questions in a row. I suppose these are the comedic premises that the Watcher is throwing at us as a stand-up comedian. Such riveting humor as, what if the Hulk were yellow? And what if the Thing were blue? And who could forget, what if the Invisible Girl dyed her hair? Okay, that one's pretty funny. But this one just struck me as very bizarre. Although I think that was the goal of this issue and probably all of the what if issues, so mission accomplished, I guess.
Number 7. What if Betty Brant, instead of Spider-Man, had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This one comes to us from a 3-part story and is simply one story within that. It is from the original What If series Volume 1 from 1997, issue number 7. Here, Betty Brant, instead of Peter Parker, is the one bitten by the radioactive spider, gaining spider-like abilities. While the story isn't a strange premise at all, like I don't think it's weird for Betty Brant to become, you know, a version of Spider-Man, what really makes this one stand out for me in terms of its weirdness is Betty's costume here, which is, it's something. It's also odd that in this alternate reality, Betty happens to be the only alternate person to become Spider-Man that manages to survive the ordeal, with both John Jameson and Flash Thompson in this issue, who are featured in the other 2 stories, dying as a result of gaining spider powers and attempting to use them. Instead of Betty choosing not to pursue the thief that kills Peter's Uncle Ben, she simply is unable to because she used up all her web fluid posing for pictures for Peter. Which is a whole other thing, but also, wait, can't you just go after them anyways? Don't you have superpowers? It doesn't matter that your web fluid is gone. Anyways, she still blames herself for Uncle Ben's death and decides to, quit being Spider Lady, which I think is a little harsh. I feel like she wasn't really super responsible for that, but I guess she could have gone after him. I don't know why she didn't do that. Be like, use your super strength, climb on walls, do any of the other things you can do. Number 6. What if Submariner never regained his memories? This story allows us to glimpse into an alternate reality where Namor never met the Human Torch and never ended up regaining his memories and returning to Atlantis, learning that he was the true ruler of the Underwater Kingdom. Instead, the Submariner remains unaware of his true heritage and ends up joining a ship's crew, finding himself inexplicably drawn to the sea. I wonder why. The captain of the ship, Namor's friend McCandless, ends up being mutineered against and goes overboard while injured when he believes they found the lost entrance to the center of the earth. Namor, or Mr. Smith as he's known, follows after him and ends up being retrieved from the ice-cold water by Inuits later on. They end up worshipping Namor as the Lord of the Frozen Sea, along with frozen Captain America, who they worship as the Lord of the Frozen Ice. And Namor's like, I guess this is my life now, and I'm pretty good with it. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and now he just gets to be the Lord of the Sea really far up north where it's cold. Cool, I guess? Number 5. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? Well, all of these stories are based on things that actually did happen. This is also based on something that did happen, so if you think it sounds weird because it's just so random, that is a thing that actually happened, where Iron Man and Doctor Doom in main continuity traveled back to the time of Arthurian legend. However, rather than getting back home in this version while Doom manages to leave, he leaves Iron Man trapped in the past. Oh no! A weird turn of events ends up leaving Tony Stark as the ruler and king of England following the death of his friend King Arthur. Tony actually proves to be a great king and lives out his days there in the past just as an accomplished and celebrated ruler. I actually wonder what effect that would have had on the present, because I feel like everything would be very different if Tony Stark were the king of England. This all goes down in issue 33 of the 1997 What If series, so you can check that out if you want. Number 4. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? One of them is just being a giant brain. It's true. Actually, overall, these powers feel very Doom Patrol meets X-Men in my opinion. In this alternate story, when subjected to cosmic radiation, the FF get completely different powers than what each member has in main continuity. Johnny becomes a robot, Ben gets dragon-like wings, Reed is just a disembodied brain, admittedly not a very great power, and Sue ends up with the least original powers, getting Reed's old powers instead, the ability to stretch her body like Taffy or Silly Putty. Really, I feel like Sue always gets sort of like the worst part of these stories whenever she's in a What If. Hers are always so like quick or just so kinda lame, and I'm like, dang, why doesn't Invisible Woman get some cool stuff? I think she was still Invisible Girl at this time though, maybe that's why. Number 3. What if Aunt May instead of her nephew Peter had been bitten by that radioactive spider? This story reimagines what would have happened if once again it was not Peter Parker who received the fateful radioactive spider bite, but instead was his elderly Aunt May. This is from a humor issue, so you know it's gonna be weird and you know it's gonna be great. And it is. Aunt May here ends up getting bit after realizing that Peter had left his lunch at home on the day he and his class were meant to visit the exhibit at the Science Institute. And if you're like, Amanda, it's not called the Science Institute. Seriously, if you go to this issue, that is what is written on the building in the Science Institute. Of what? We don't know. She successfully delivers the forgotten lunch to Peter, cottage cheese and mashed string beans, but ends up feeling unwell on her way home and finds that she has developed superpowers. She makes her own costume, becoming Spider-Man, and ends up facing off in this story with the ridiculous villain, Leapfrog. Because that's just how it goes. Number 2. What if the Fantastic Four all had the stretching powers of Mr. Fantastic? Oh boy, I love this issue because we get 4 stories where we get to imagine what it would be like if multiple members of the FF shared basically the same powers. And in the one where they all get stretching powers, they just never end up becoming the Fantastic Four because their collective power is just considered, well, kinda lame. Sue in fact insists that they never let anyone know of their powers because she feels like, and I quote, a freak. Both Sue and Ben feel as though the stretching powers are ridiculous, monstrous, ugly, and dumb, while Reed and Johnny actually think they're pretty neat and even could be useful. Still, Sue and Ben's way of thinking wins out, so the Fantastic Four never become a superhero team. The end. Number 1. What if Thanos had changed Galactus into a human being? I really love this What If story personally. It comes to us from, once again, one of the humor issues of What If, so you know it's gonna be a riot. In this story, Thanos turns Galactus into a human being in order to defeat him, and Galactus ends up on Earth with no memory of who he was or is. He does, however, happen to look a lot like Elvis Presley, and even sings and plays like him too. He meets a woman named Gertrude who introduces him to the works of Presley, and Galactus is basically convinced that he must indeed be like an amnesiac version of Elvis Presley, returned from the dead. He goes on to have a successful music career, and when his memories are later restored by Adam Warlock, who also offers to return his power to him, he actually decides instead to stay on Earth and live out his life here as Elvis with Gertrude and her son Toby. Which, I mean, fair enough. That sounds like a pretty good life.
Number 10. Johnny becomes a living robot. We have talked about 1977's What If number 6. It's the one where the Fantastic Four have different powers. You know, where Reed becomes a brain and Ben Grimm gains dragon wings. That one. Sue Storm gets the most boring power, just taking on Reed Richards' stretching ability, but Johnny got a power that doesn't really make sense to me. Growing extra limbs or losing your body, minus your brain, and being human rubber doesn't really make sense either. But how the cosmic rays converted Johnny into a mechanical living robot with metal parts that calls himself Mandroid, I'll never know. Johnny is now forever a living robot and can control other forms of technology. He's also eternally a metal version of himself, which is honestly pretty good for a guy who loves his looks, because they'll never change. He's still a hothead though, so there's that. Number 9. WW2 Space Nick Fury. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it is instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discover interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II we fight is more like Space Sector War, between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space. Don't ask me to define where those sectors are, I cannot. As this is still set at the same general time as regular WW2, some of these same characters are going to be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, new high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens. It's a good bit of fun. We learn in the story that Admiral Von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a master race. So it seems we can master interstellar travel, but we still can't just accept each other's differences yet. Who put some reality in my comic book? Number 8. Thor, Herald of Galactus. Yes, the terrifying thought of someone as powerful as Thor becoming the Herald of Galactus is a strange thought, if only because it's so troubling. In this What If, Thor beats the ever-living heck out of the female Silver Surfer, who is the Herald of Galactus as he attacks Asgard, after she mortally wounds Sif. Seeing just how powerful Thor and his hammer are, Galactus stops the fight and offers Thor a place as his herald. Now, Thor initially says no, as we'd expect, and goes to keep fighting Galactus, but when the big purple dude points out that Asgard is in pretty bad shape, Thor takes one look, drops his hammer, and accepts. Just like that. Now, Thor makes a pretty awesome looking herald, even in the odd style of the comic, choosing the most fearsome and brutal worlds to feed to the World Eater, and sparing the weaker innocent worlds, again, as we'd expect. When Thor hears of Asgard being ruled over by Loki though, who de-lifed Odin and left Asgard in ruins, he takes some time from heralding to deal with his brother. Rediscovering his hammer and wielding it alongside the power cosmic, Thor becomes extremely powerful. Freeing his imprisoned friends and giving up Asgard for Galactus to feast upon, he destroys Loki and his frost giants and remains as the Herald of Galactus, saving innocent worlds from his destruction. Awesome.
At number 7, we have Maggie Nito. This is a very niche one, and I'll give you $1 if you can pause the video now and guess where this character makes her first and only appearance. Okay, Maggie Nito is a mean little girl with a Venom shirt, and she appears on a gag splash page in What If issue number 100. Called Wolverwimp. Wolverwimp was covered in the first part of this video on the channel. It's basically Wolverine with styrofoam bones. But on the cover right next to him, we're not quite sure who Maggie Nito is or what she symbolizes, but it's suggested that she may have some powers of her own, possibly similar to those of the popular anti-hero Magneto. Even though she's mean, it's arguable that she'd be considered a superhero if her story was given some more airtime. If she was meant to be the Magneto of this hypothetical storyline, we just hope she would take on the hero status that Magneto currently flaunts. I don't know. Comment below what you think Magneto's powers would be if she was given a proper issue. At number 6 is Rockstar Black Bolt. In this What If issue, a bunch of different questions are asked in the same comic, and each one gets a short exploration of what would happen. In the case of Black Bolt becoming a rock star, his voice would naturally dismantle the structure of the arena he was singing at, and probably beyond. Along with his band, the Inhumans, this image is just so weird to picture for some reason. Not the crumbling environment, but just the image of Black Bolt screaming his soul out into the microphone, singing none other than a Rolling Stones song. I suppose all these what ifs are gonna give us weird new perspectives of the characters we know doing things they don't normally do, but for some reason this one just gave me a weird vibe. Maybe it's that one panel where he's screaming into the mic with his tongue out. At number 5 we have Doctor Doom / The Thing. This one falls in the category of weird but also pretty badass, at least in how he looks. And maybe arguable on whether or not he's a hero in this case because it is Doctor Doom that turns into the Thing, not the other way around. But let's just call this character a direct mix between the Thing and Doctor Doom for the purposes of this list, which would make him good enough. Basically, in this what if, Ben Grimm is turned into the Hulk, and Doctor Doom is instead the one who's turned into the Thing. There's a lot going on in this story as you can imagine, but for a brief period we get to see the rocky figure of the Thing decked out in Doctor Doom's green hood. And when he inevitably faces off against the Ben Grimm Hulk, he does get taken down a notch after a rough defeat. But it was a pretty weird combo while it lasted. Cool, but weird. But also cool, but weird. Definitely weird. At number 4 is Storm Thor. This character comes to be in the what if that poses the question, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? And the answer is that Storm is somehow able to lift Mjolnir and become Thor. There have been other heroes before that have wielded Mjolnir like Beta Ray Bill, Captain America, and even Superman. But in this case, Storm becomes the goddess of thunder. And it's just a weird image to see her in the cape and shoulder armor. But it gets even weirder when she's tasked with clashing against a version of Thor that was turned into a frog, or the other way around, I can't really remember. If you saw the first part of this video, I covered Frog Thor already, but I figured we needed to talk about Storm Thor as well. It's fair to say that this was a weird what if issue. It's made it into both parts of this list. At number 3 we have 1000 Hulks. This obviously isn't one individual weird hero, but an event that spawns 1000 of the same character and creates a very weird army of nameless versions of the Hulk. So, what if? What would happen? Well, if you couldn't already have guessed, the answer is insanity. Basically, the title is What If the Gamma Bomb Spawned 1000 Hulks? But it's not quite what actually takes place in the story. The story explores the tragic events of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs and theorizes if instead of decimating whole populations, they actually spawned 1000 Japanese Hulks. It's a weird theory to ponder. I feel like they could have kept it out of a tragic historical context and still gotten the point across, but nonetheless, 1000 Hulks is a very strange and fun what if. Spoiler, they take over America, which you could imagine is totally possible if there were 1000 Hulks, and I'm sure they could do it in like a day. There'd be zero stability when they finally got control. At number 2 we have Reed Richards as a bodiless brain. This character shows up in the what if that asks, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? Yes, it's the same one that I covered earlier that had Ben Grimm sporting dragon wings. Only in Mr. Fantastic's case, he's reduced to a tiny little fleshy brain just laying on the ground. But he can talk and everything still, just telekinetically. He also seems to have mind control capabilities. What's hilarious about this version of Reed Richards is that he seems super optimistic about the whole thing. Like, he's completely vulnerable and helpless, but all in all, he's totally looking forward to life as a brain, or as Big Brain, which seems to be his new moniker. It's sort of obvious from the jump that his change into a brain is sort of a nod to Reed Richards' famed intellect as one of the greatest minds in the world. But I guess they wanted to see what he could accomplish with just the mind part and nothing else. Good thing he's got his Fantastic Four buddies to carry him around, because otherwise he'd still be sitting on that rock waiting for someone's mind to control. At number 1, we have Aunt May Spider-Woman. This one is self-explanatory really. The question is posed, what if Aunt May was the one bitten by the radioactive spider? It's at the end of issue number 23, volume 1, check it out if you have time. Basically, she comes home and the spider's on the door frame. It bites her, and the next thing we know, Aunt May is crawling up the side of a building. Then she promptly sews her own costume together and starts fighting a frog-like villain with springs on his feet. What makes this character even goofier is that as all this is happening, she forgets that she'd been in the middle of baking bread and the dough has expanded beyond what was expected. Like way beyond. It pretty much fills her whole entire kitchen. She then takes the dough and uses it to her advantage as she summons it in battle to soften a big free fall, and then even turns it into a whip and hooks the frog dude's ankle. She literally uses the dough to like swing the frog guy into a tree and deliver the final blow. It's definitely one of the silliest moments in any Marvel comic book I've read thus far, and I'm just surprised it didn't make it into the part 1 of this video.